The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Saturdays or Sundays, SOR Media, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this broadcast or podcast without the express written consent of SOR Media is strictly prohibited. Listener discretion is advised. Are you experienced? Then come own the night with us.
Little brother has taken control, shoveling dirt in every hole. Predators to condemn your soul, watching you and watching me. We're all
Station atop the mountains of British Columbia, live from SOR headquarters. This is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
We live behind glass curtains and act like nothing's wrong. Soon you will belong.
You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, and on Spaced Out Radio on iTunes. You can follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, and on Instagram at Dave Scott SOR, on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio.
Brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me.
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride on Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye.
It's Monday, October 8th, Tuesday, October 9th, if you're on the East Coast or across the pond. And this, my friends, is Spaced Out Radio. Hope you had a great day and night. I am your host, Dave Scott, broadcasting to you live from the Great White North, on top of the snowy mountains of central British Columbia, right here at SOR headquarters. We are 150,000 strong nightly on the SOR radio network and Deep Talk Radio, and we welcome each and every one of you to tonight's show. If you want to listen to our archives, they are free at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Just do old Davey the favor, hit that subscribe button. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you. You can rock out to Bumblefoot, shop at our store, read up on the encounter online, and so much more. Tonight's show is brought to you by the YouTube channel Ensuho. Sebastian Martin brings high-quality messages to the masses. You're going to want to check them out. Go to spacedoutradio.com, click on the Ensuho banner, and subscribe to the channel today. It's been a long time since we've had this guy on, and I'm going to be honest, it's been way too long. I've missed him. Rob Morphy from Cryptopia.us is back to talk about the history of some of the strangest sightings and encounters people have reported. Also, we do have to mention that he has one of the top 3 beards in cryptozoology as well. Rob has been studying the strange and weird since he was a child. A lover of comics and artistry, Rob brings his journalistic research to the forefront when it comes to everything from aliens to Bigfoot, Frogman, and everything in between. The stranger, the better for Rob, as he and his team look throughout history for some of the oddest stories they can find. Now, Rob will be the first one to tell you that he's not sure if most of these are real or not. But what he will tell you is that he is 100% convinced people are having these strange occurrences that cannot be logically explained. Then at the bottom of hour number 3, we're going to introduce to you our new newsman, Olaf Phillips. Everett Themers going behind the scenes to build the encounter online. We bring in Olaf Phillips from Paranoia Magazine to hop on in for the new encounter starting at 11:30 Pacific, 2:30 a.m. Eastern. Mr. Rob Morphy. It's been a while, man. It's been a while.
Dave Scott, it has been far too long, my friend. I am so stoked to be here. You have no idea.
Oh, you have no idea, man. First of all, before we even get started, we need a beard update.
Absolutely. Well, conditioning bi-daily. You don't want to make it, you don't want to spoil it too much because then it gets unruly like a spoiled teenager, and that's no good. So, I like to pick it out because you can't be too hard with like a standard brush. I have a nice beard brush and a pick. And basically I keep it in a baggie at night with olive oil and read it gently, stories,
nice.
And poems by Khalil Gibran until it finally goes off to sleep. So
Very
yes,
nice.
I baby the beard.
It's
doing great.
Nice.
It's bushy and wonderful and unkempt, and half the people I know encourage me to shave on a daily basis, and that's how I know I'm doing it right.
Oh, you know that. We're big fans of your beard around here, my friend, and we appreciate good, high-quality facial hair from our guests, so we're very, very excited to get that update with you, my friend. What have you been up to? It's been about 18 months since we've had you on the air. I know time has flown on by. You were once a previous guest on this show, but as you're very open about, your mother, whom you care for, is very, very ill, and we had to make a decision whether or not, you take that 3 hours a night and make sure mom is okay, or you go take it selfishly and play on the radio. I still think you made the right choice in regards to helping out mom.
Well, thank you for that. And you know what? She's been having actually a good couple of months. I really, really thank you, and I thank you for all the concern you've always shown and all the goodwill you've sent. She's still having a tough time of it, but God bless her. She's tough as nails and just an extraordinary woman. So I thank you for that. And otherwise, just continuing to write articles about all sorts of crazy cryptids and extraterrestrial encounters. I'm compiling it together for my first book on the subject matter, which will be, as you mentioned, my favorite stuff is the most obscure and bizarre and little-known tales in both the cryptozoological and ufological worlds. So I'm trying to basically put together a collection of the most bat-poop crazy encounters throughout the last century across the world, and that's been pretty fun. And I've also started a new podcast called the Cryptonaut Podcast, which when you break it down, it's crypto for hidden, not as in like astronaut, meaning explorers. And just basically each week, me and a couple of buddies of mine, Mark Storrs and Chris Carnicelli, break down a very specific case, like a series of encounters or one individual monster, and just try to bring it to the audience. And obviously, just like everything else we do, the more obscure, the better. So that's pretty much how I've been occupying the time.
Hey, I want to ask you in regards to the way you got started in this, because since you were last on, our audience has grown in leaps and bounds, both live and on our replays on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/spaced out radio, as well as iTunes or wherever people are listening to it. But I wanted to ask you, in order to reintroduce you to our audience, how did you get involved with this? Because everybody has a story, Rob, and I think yours is just as important.
Right on. Well, it started, like you were saying, when I was very young. It is a combination of experiences had by close loved ones and pop culture, and that's probably a reason why those are two of my main influences. In terms of pop culture, I absolutely, from a very formative age, fell in love with the television show In Search Of, the old Alan Landberg produced show with Leonard Nimoy, narrating it, and I absolutely loved it. I was enthralled by every single mystery, especially the Honey Island Swamp Monster and alien abductions and all of that stuff, and that kind of corresponded at the same time with a UFO sighting my mom had, which she has given me license to tell the world about. So I'm finally able to release the story. And what it was is she was driving home when we lived in a small upstate New York village called Cuga Village on the shores of Cuga Lake. She was driving home at night and she saw this fiery orange object in the sky. It was very bright, and she thought, that's an extraordinary moon. The moon doesn't usually kind of ripple and undulate and look that bright. But then she glanced out of the other car window and realized, oh, wait, that's the moon that traditionally controls the tides and illuminates the night. So what is this? Just at the last second, she slammed on the brakes because she realized not only had she noticed that all of this extraordinary thing was in the sky, but the cows in this adjoining field, because at this point we lived way out in the boondocks, had apparently been driven to distraction by this thing, and they were, careening across the road. So basically, a slow motion stampede, as upstate New York cows are wont to be, pretty laid back and chill, had to be avoided, and she watched this thing as it just basically floated across the field and disappeared across the horizon. And I have the vaguest memories of her. I was about 4 or 5 at the time, regaling my father with the story of what she had seen. And I just remember the excitement in her voice and how wide-eyed she was. And she was more thrilled, I think, than frightened, but a combination of knowing that something unusual happened, and it so just intrigued my mom and my dad, for that matter, even though he was much more of a skeptic. He was a guy that would roll his eyes. He would support and buy me my awesome paperbacks about Bigfoot, but, he was always a guy that, kept his feet firmly on the ground. My mom, on the other hand, actively encouraged all my weird interests, and so she's the one that got me into the In Search Of show. And so this 1-2 punch of being a kid born in the 70s and coming of age in that glorious time, this halcyon era of paranormal literature and television with all the great Rod Serling, narrated things about ancient astronauts and just, the legend of Boggy Creek. Everything was just coming together, and I think it hit me in just the right way. So it was a touch of the personal and a big fat dollop of the pop culture that made me say as a young man, I'm fascinated by this stuff. I'm going to try to remain intrigued by this for as long as I can. And then cut to some decades later, we're talking the turn of the millennia here, just after the cusp of the 21st century here, I was with a friend of mine, and I said, you know what? We're going to go on vacation. We're going to see a buddy of ours in Dallas. We're going to go to New Orleans and do what, guys in their 20s do in New Orleans. Why don't we just grab our video equipment? Because we were doing local commercials and things like that. And I was making a living doing freelance journalism for local papers. I thought, let's just stop by Honey Island. It's on the way to New Orleans anyway. Let's make a documentary. And from there, it occurred to me, just this name, American Monsters, popped in my head. And I'm one of the co-founders of the original American Monsters website, which is now the cryptopia.us site. And so it occurred to me that, not only do I just want to make this documentary and explore these things, I want to take the skills I've developed over the years as a reporter and apply it to this thing that I love. I also, not to sound too braggadocious, I also have managed to shore up the dividends now and then by being an illustrator and a graphic designer. So basically, I took the Scooby-Doo kid in me who loved all of these old paranormal things, and I thought, I'm going to write and draw about these things that I absolutely love. And then American Monsters took off. We were approached by all sorts of people about TV shows. I've done illustrations for different television programs, done research. I had 2 auditions in the last week for networks I can't mention on the name, but it's basically just I've totally thrown myself into this world that I love because in the end I am a 46-year-old man that is still a 14-year-old kid that loves monsters and wants to draw monsters, write about monsters, and really talk to people that have seen things that most human beings will never get a chance to experience in their lives.
And you know what, to have supportive parents in regards to this, Rob, that means a lot because for so many people here, even myself, it took forever for my parents to kind of accept what I am doing with this radio program. And a lot of people are like that, people who have had experiences who are called liars, who are called, told to grow up because their imagination is just way, way too thick people who are accused of making up these weird, strange stories. And then along comes a guy like you who says, I believe you. So let's talk about the influence of your parents here for a second in allowing you to really go after this whole monster phenomena. And then in part 2, what's it like to tell somebody you believe them in their story?
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you bring this up. This is something I don't get a chance to talk about a lot. In regards to the first part, I couldn't have traded my parents and wouldn't have for all the tea in China, all the stars in the sky. They're just extraordinary people. My father passed away when I was 17, but until then, like I say, he was a skeptic. He was a man that, he was a hardworking, John Wayne loving, straight up American man. But he loved, I think, the fact that he had such an odd son. Like, it could very easily, he was like a star football player. He is all of the cliches that you would think would absolutely hate to have a chubby, geeky son that loves monsters and horror films. If it was a Hollywood sitcom, we would be at each other's throats, but it wasn't like that at all. I think he loved that I followed my passions and was always there for encouragement. My mom, conversely, was absolutely all in. She just is fascinated with this kind of stuff. She bought all the Time Life books and the Mysteries of the Unknown stuff whenever she'd see it on late night TV. She was as fascinated as I was, and I think I inherited a lot of that from her. But in their own ways, even though they both came from absolutely different points of view, even different generations, they were 16 years apart, they fell in love, they found each other, and they were fully supportive of everything that I did and my little sister did. And my little sister fell kind of in the footsteps of my dad. She's very straight-laced and straightforward, but still exceedingly supportive of all of the crazy stuff I like to do. So I think they understood, and I'm very lucky like this. Like I said, I've never had to fight this. The theory in the family was, if you are enjoying what you're doing, and it is a substantial pay cut from the thing you would not be enjoying, but would be slowly driving you to a spiritual and physical grave, then by all means, make ends meet the best you can and try to be happy. So I could never thank my parents and my family enough. And I know I'm very lucky in that respect. A lot of people have to fight tooth and nail to find their own identity. And in terms of what I like to bring when I'm interviewing people, when I interview people, a lot of times, as you can imagine, they're very trepidatious. They've encountered from even loved ones, not just simple skepticism, but sometimes outright ridicule, derision, rolling their eyes, even subtle things where the friend or family member doesn't think they're being that harsh on them. When somebody tries to explain having run into an extraterrestrial or just some strange creature that seems to be out of a drive-in movie, but that they actually saw with their own two eyes and had interactions with in the real world, it's very difficult for people that have not had this experience to wrap their heads around it. And oftentimes, the only way they can feel comfortable with their version of reality is to dismiss it, even if it actually ends up being very hurtful to the people involved. And of course, there's other people that aren't even concerned about their feelings and are just going to basically crap all over it. So I always try to make people understand that I'm not in this for the jokes. I'm not in this to make light of what they've seen. I'm in this because I'm taking this from a journalistic perspective. What I call myself is a crypto historian, though it also extends to extraterrestrial encounters. And I feel it is important to get this down, to get down what people have seen, what they've encountered, what they truly believe they've seen. You have to wade through some, shady things sometimes. It goes without saying, whether you're a reporter, a police officer, or, a cryptozoologist. It all kind of comes down to your instincts. But I think it's very important to get this down. And I think it's important not only because it helps paint a full picture for the other investigators out there to kind of see what is going on, but also for future scientists and historians, even anthropologists. Because when you look back at a certain period of time, if you're, say, a zoologist, you want to know what weird things people were seeing, whether it's in a sub-Saharan African village and then some animal that had been reported a few times, or if it's a crazy ape man that's seen somewhere near Folk, Arkansas. it's important to know what was seen, when it was seen, and where it was seen. And if you're an anthropologist, it's kind of to get the zeitgeist of what's going on at any given period of time. It's important to know what people saw, what people believed, what they thought they saw. And so I feel like it's important for all that. But to get back to your question, I know I go tangential. I think these people find such a relief when they hear a voice say, I believe you. I'm going to take what you say at face value, and I'm going to give you a chance to tell your story. And you're going to tell it in your words. And if you need your identity to be concealed, your anonymity will be preserved, because I understand that not only is it a huge act of courage to come forward and talk about this kind of stuff and use your own name, and I admire those that do, but I don't hold it against anybody who doesn't, because, I mean, we've seen it time and time again. The rewards are minimal. But the grief you get for coming forward with an unusual experience can be of a magnitude of either just you become a laughingstock in your hometown, or in worst case scenarios like the sheriff of Falkville, Alabama, that claimed to have seen a metallic man that he took pictures of. His marriage fell apart. He ended up losing payments on his house. He was voted out of his job. He basically, lived a life of obscurity and fell into pits of alcoholism and other detrimental things, all because he came forward with an unusual sighting. So I think when people hear a voice that says, I respect what you've been through, I am fascinated, because in the end, I am fascinated. I am still that kid that wants to know, but now I'm a man that has the skill sets to dig deeper and explore these things. And then I try to offer them whatever knowledge I've gleaned from similar cases, from other eyewitnesses. Sometimes, with the permission of both parties and working out in great detail, I put people in contact with each other so that they can kind of create a sort of network that helps them support each other if they've seen something extraordinarily similar. And they, because I think the thing that is most terrifying of all isn't just that monsters or extraterrestrials can be ostensibly terrifying to look at. It's that you feel alone. You feel like no one else has had this experience. No one else has experienced this kind of terror at confronting something that shouldn't exist. And worst of all, no one believes me when I try to express it. That's an extremely just hard thing to go through, especially if you do not have people around you that are supporting you. And so if I can help in even just the tiniest way, not only preserve their stories, again, like I say, for the scholars of the future and those that are just simply interested in this phenomenon, but to do something that helps them feel better and get on with their lives, well, then it's a win-win as far as I'm concerned.
Rob, when you look at all the stories that you have covered and people whom you have talked to say, you're not going to believe me when I tell you this, and you hear the strange stories about, cryptids that shouldn't even exist. They're right out of a comic book. How do you use your own personal edit button to say this is BS, or, hey, we may have something here?
It's interesting. That comes in a lot of different levels. First off, if it's a face-to-face encounter, you are given a lot of benefits in that, because then you get a lot of visual cues. You get a lot of audio cues that you would not be able to get, say, if it's just a written, if it's a written correspondence back and forth. A little bit of this can be transposed to, say, telephone conversations, which also helps. So you have to trust the instincts you've developed, either as a poker player, a human being, or in this case, as a journalist, to just sort of apply to what seems right. You also do the background research. You find out what's going on, like what movies were on the TV guide in that area during that moment that they saw. If they saw a lake monster that had a certain amount of scales and the horror of Party Beach was playing, as was the case with the Thetis lake monster, excuse me. I remember you corrected me on that a while ago, and I'm very proud to have tried to remember that, which I still, by the way, think is a real phenomenon, but there's some skeptical angles to it, then that could play into it. So you look at all the angles, you trust your own instincts, and then you try to see what they're getting out of it. I mean, a lot of people, if someone's coming to you and they seem either genuinely afraid, reluctant to talk, they are desperate to preserve their anonymity, These are all things that do not guarantee honesty, but are indicators of it. And there's also certain cues that I probably won't reveal just because, like, if you tell people how to make the perfect, Bigfoot print, then somebody out there is going to abuse the privilege. But that having been said, you just in the end have to trust the skills you've developed over the years, your own instincts, and to see just basically if their story stands up,
right,
if it's corroboratable by anyone else who's seen it, and if they repeat it. And and invariably, I have a very intensive questioning style. It's almost, I hate to say it, interrogative. Like I'm very kind about it. I let people take their time, but there is not. It's not only long and detailed, but there's redundancies, and in the redundancies, that's where you get a sense of the simple truth that's being repeated sometimes, or something that's evolving as they're telling it. And it's not to say somebody can't have a genuinely unique experience and maybe embellish, which doesn't destroy the veracity of what they're saying, but does kind of play hell with their credibility. But if you get tells over and over again that just seem to indicate that this person is just doing their best to paint a picture for you, that usually shines through pretty quickly, especially if you've been doing this as long as I have.
Mm-hmm. And I can understand that. And everybody is going to look for their 15 minutes of fame. But I mean, some of the tales that you have heard have borderlined on not only psychotic, but just ridiculous as well, Rob. And when you have those stories, how do you take them seriously when you know that someone's just trying to pull the wool over your eyes?
I don't. If I honestly know, and it's like the gut radar on top of just enough tells, well, then I will be like, I will do my best to specifically trip that person up, and then just be like, listen, if you're just having fun with this, you're just having fun with this, do your thing, approach somebody else. I'm not interested, nor am I interested in just perpetrating this myth that you're trying to create for whatever reason. Usually, based on the reaction I get when I say something like that, it is the final nail in the coffin as to whether or not I think that I've really truly nailed a hoster, or if maybe I was a little bit off base. But put that aside for a second. I have had to deal with eyewitnesses that have had truly, I mean, like I've said before, guano crazy stories. And my first instinct, just as a person, like anyone's would be to be like, oh my God, I don't even know what to do with this. But then I think to myself, this person took the time to approach me. Let's see what they've got to say. I get to know them personally. Hopefully I can meet them face to face, or at least Skype, find ways to, like say, have a more personal communication with them. And I have to admit, very recently, and it's something we're going to do a podcast on soon, and I don't want to reveal too much about this, but I encountered a woman whose encounter was shown on a television show, but was misrepresented grandly. It was put in the context of a cryptid, when what she feels she had was much more of a diabolical encounter with what she believes is likely a demon, or at least something nefarious and supernatural. Now, you know me, Dave. We've known each other now for years, and we've talked. I'm a cryptid guy. I'm a guy that likes the tangibility of unknown animals. I'm also a guy that likes the fact that UFOs, by and large, seem to be technology from somewhere else, be it interplanetary, interdimensional, wherever it's from. These things are more concrete. This is something I feel comfortable with. The paranormal world is something that I'm fascinated by and I absolutely research, but that I've always been a little bit, super skeptical of, and a little bit just uneasy with the ability to prove it out. But the more I've interviewed this woman, the more contact we've had, the forthrightness with which she's answered questions. She has passed a lot of the little tests, like I said, that I like to give, that are fairly subtle but work through. All of a sudden, I find myself going, there's something to this. Now, I might not specifically have in my belief system a place where I'm comfortable saying 100% this is going on. But I am at a place as both a journalist and, like I say, a crypto historian, where if it passed the smell test, whether or not it is something that I, like I say, am personally 100% comfortable with. If I believe that this person believes what they are telling me, then their story deserves to be chronicled. Then what they've expressed to me and what they want to share is worth sharing for two reasons. One, again, just to paint a better, clearer picture of what is going on at this place, at this time, and with these people. And two, to go back to your former question, if somebody else has experienced something like this, it might make them not only feel less alone, but feel as if they have a place to go to tell their story and other people to communicate with. So that's something I guess I have to deal with more often than I thought I would have. When I started this, it was just straight cryptozoology. Then it moved to cryptozoology and extraterrestrial encounters. Now with Cryptopia.us, once we left American Monsters behind, it is just wide open. I am interested in the unknown. And I found that I have to put myself in a headspace where I can't judge, right off the cuff as I would like to, as so many would like to. If all of the other criteria are met, even if it's not something I feel entirely comfortable with, I still think it deserves to be chronicled.
Hey, I want to get a quick question in here because we're going to get to a lot of weird stories that you are covering recently, and everything can be found at cryptopia.us if people want to check it out. But Joe in the chat room is saying, I've heard about many, many different crypto researchers over the years, and nobody ever mentions the cryptid creature, the rake.
That's interesting. Now, I have to admit, I'm not an expert in the rake, but what I have always believed is that, and please ask her if she'll add more, I've always thought that was more of a paranormal manifestation. Now, I know that I'm going back to my dorky D&D days, because let me tell you, I'm a dork through and through, and no one should be in doubt of that. But I have to say, in terms of the cryptozoological phenomenon, and I'm looking it up right now so I can research on the fly. So here's the first thing that came up. The rake is a creature believed to be a humanoid in appearance with several references in folklore and horrific urban legends. It has been found on different internet sites. The creature reportedly attacks humans due to unknown reasons and often causes its victims great psychological trauma. Okay, so this is kind of along the lines of what I was thinking. And I was instantly, maybe partially because of his name, putting it in categories with wraiths and stuff, because my mind is like a huge archive of weird things. And so, I make weird cross-references and correlations. What I have always heard about the rake, and again, I'm going to admit dead up that I have never done any extensive research. I have not written an article on this creature yet, though, of course, now I'm fully intrigued and probably will start digging into it almost immediately. But like this article just says here, as I'm glancing at it, it's tied to such, urban legends as Slender Man and things like that. What I think this is a folkloric entity, probably not entirely unlike the hag that sits on the chest that draws the air out of you, and that, a lot of people now think was sleep paralysis, but was the supernatural manifestation of it in the time before science gave it a name, blended with the post-internet pop sensations that are Slender Man and all of these other phenomenon that, like Black-Eyed Kids, which is something I have written about pretty extensively and find fascinating, that are a combination of what seems to be genuinely horrific experiences and basically just the modern equivalent of a campfire story. And as we all know, the internet is just the 21st century campfire, and we're all basically huddled around it, and we can find ghost stories whenever we want. So I don't know a ton about the rake, though I would tell your listener, keep your eye peeled at cryptopia.us, because an article will probably be showing up soon. It's little things like this that pop into my head that kind of gnaw away until I write about them. But as far as I would define it, I don't think this would be a cryptozoological phenomenon.
That does bring up a good point, though, Rob, because how many of these creatures, whether it's the rake, Slender Man, Hat Man, or many others, how many of these have just been manifested by people themselves? And I realize this is more a paranormal type question, I guess I would say, but do these manifestations and putting energy into them really create this character that truly does not exist.
Well, there's something really interesting about that. I remember reading a book years ago, being a sci-fi geek, by Robert Heinlein, where basically, and I wish I could tell your listeners the specific book, but I'm sure it's Googleable, that every fictional character, every figment of an imagination that had ever been conceived by humankind, or any other sentient being in the universe, becomes manifest and corporeal somewhere else. This is not a new idea, and I don't think Heinlein was the first to come up with it. There's ideas of tulpas, things that you can invest with a sort of psychological and spiritual energy that become real based on belief. And we all know, I mean, from simple placebos to, I mean, the power of prayer could manifestly be the divine answering your implorations, but it could also be this sheer swell of belief manifesting goodness tangibly in the world. And I think maybe it's a combination thereof. So I think there is something to the thought. Now, I don't think every time somebody makes up, you know, I don't think Cujo is necessarily on like outer left Neptune existing in some manifest way just because Stephen King wrote about it. Though I might be wrong. I mean, in an infinite universe, infinite possibilities are there. But I do think the more belief you give something, the more powerful it can become, beyond a shadow of a doubt. And if enough people believe in one thing and think about it, like say the Slender Man. Slender Man, de facto urban legend. It is created by the mind of man, put on the internet and used to scare children and have fun and put in video games. But if there is enough belief behind it, does something happen of it? And we know that an unfortunate victim lost her life, I believe, because of other kids that believed in the Slender Man. So that alone, that's the loss of human life. That's a devastating blow for a family that they will likely never get over. So, yes, we can, sit here and in our lofty intellectual way chortle and say, well, yes, of course, it's it's fake, it's la la. But when it has this kind of repercussions, it becomes manifestly real. So I think there is something going to the more paranormal aspect. I think there is something to the idea that the more energy something is given through the power of belief, the more likely it is that that thing or something similar can manifest. And then you jump over a little bit to something that, the great John Keel, who of course wrote the Mothman Prophecies and investigated all sorts of paranormal events, or famous ufologist Jacques Vallée, who wrote in Passport to Magonia and other things about ultra-terrestrials, these entities, these sort of amorphous creatures that can assume any form they want and whose agenda is absolutely unknown. Some people compare them to the trickster gods of old, of Native American lore, or Loki, which is probably the most famous one, especially for fans of Marvel movies. Just these creatures that are basically there to play hell with the human race. Sometimes help, a lot of times hurt, sometimes are homicidal, sometimes will save your life. But some people say that they're simply there for their own amusement, and they're just having at you. Other people say that it's sort of like a Buddhist koan or something, where in their tricks and in their deceptions, they are teaching the human race valuable lessons that will help it evolve spiritually and intellectually. I don't know what their agenda would be or what their motivations are, if indeed they do exist. But an ultra-terrestrial could just as easily take the form of Slender Man or Freddy Krueger as it could a Sasquatch or a Grey. And the difficulty for a researcher like me in that theory is, and it's one I entertain, I've written about, it's out there and it's been put forth by a lot of great minds that have done a lot of fascinating research. But that becomes like this blanket magical statement. And if you get too deep into that rabbit hole, suddenly it's like you can't really study anything because everything is, questionable. But in the narrow scope of what we're talking about, entities like this might be able to manifest themselves into the forms of things that were completely made up and utter fiction 10 seconds before, and things, again, that are just our urban legends. If you believe long enough, can they get a little bit of just a hint of a foothold in the real world? I would hope not, to be honest. Just as a man who has to live in this world, that is not the universe I'm hopped up on existing in, but we can't completely count out that possibility.
So true. So very, very true. Let's get to some of the weird stories that you have brought for us tonight. And we're going to head to Washington State for the first one. And that is the crazy critter of Bald Mountain.
This is just one of my favorites. This is, again, the thing that really fascinates me. As valid and wonderful as Bigfoot research is, and I'll always love my Nessie, I mean, near and dear to my heart, it's these esoteric one-shot, two-shot deal creatures that really steal my heart. So this creature, the events surrounding it basically began in November of 1974, November 14th to be specific, when numerous eyewitnesses claimed to have seen a fiery object plummet to the earth about 5 miles away from a series of peaks known as Bald Mountain, hence the title, The Crazy Critter of Bald Mountain. We'll get into why it's crazy. This is in Lewis County in the state of Washington. So 3 days later on November 17th, a grocer by the name of Ernest Smith was deer hunting near the mountain where this meteor had crashed, and he stumbled across this animal that is just, it's clearly not of this earth, and it's wonderfully bizarre. I'll give you his description specifically. I'll read it as a quote. It was a horse-sized animal covered with scales and standing on 4 rubbery legs with suckers like octopus tentacles. Its head was football-shaped with a pair of antennae sticking out. And as if all that wasn't enough, a grasshopper-like head, 4 big sloppy tentacles, a horse-like, body, the thing gave off an iridescent green light, as if it was either bioluminescent or just somehow iridescent. So this poor grocer, Mr. Smith, is just doing some hunting, enjoying his day off, and he comes across something that is absolutely unfathomable. As it stands, maybe they would have thought he was tipping back a little too much, brought a flask with him. This could have just stayed there and died, but soon after, a couple from Tacoma, Roger Ramsbaugh and his wife, who unfortunately was not named, were driving through that same region on State Route 7. It was foggy out, and they saw in the distance a dull green glow. Now, the Ramsbaughs assumed that this was a neon sign, and they were thinking, all right, take a little break, knock some mud off the boots, get a drink, relieve yourself, do the things you're doing. But as they got closer, they saw the exact same creature. It has like kind of a longish neck. It's got greenish and yellow spots, but it's mostly glowing. Tim Morris did a phenomenal illustration of it, and based on that illustration and the eyewitness accounts, I did my own illustration for the article we did, and it's just a fascinating thing. But here's where it takes that great X-Files twist that I so love. After the second sighting, the law enforcement in the region had to take this seriously. So the sheriff of Lewis County, a guy named William H. Weister, he began investigating the thing, and when he drove up to the mountain for himself, he was halted by individuals claiming to represent both NASA and the U.S. Air Force. He later stated that these individuals were heavily armed and clad in military-style uniforms, but interestingly, the uniforms bore no official military insignia. Now, this isn't just some random, teenagers driving through, which is not to say teenagers are completely unreliable. We were all one once. But this is the sheriff of this region describing the story. So what we have here is a potential military cover-up, regardless of what was going on. And there's a lot of factors. First off, what landed? Was it a meteor? Was it a satellite? Was it a space experiment gone awry? Or conversely, was it completely unrelated to the creature? When this happens on the 14th and you see this crazy, seemingly alien creature on the 17th, the human mind that loves to make patterns demands this to be a connection. But in reality, the journalist in me has to go, well, yeah, maybe. I mean, it stands to reason, but we don't really have evidence of this. But what we do have evidence of is that some sort of organization, very likely the United States government, that had access to these armaments and a group of men and non-labeled uniforms, were apparently interested in these creature sightings too. For what purpose? We can only speculate. Weaponizing something from another world, capturing an ambassador from Pluto. We don't know. The speculation, that's where the as you know, Dave, and your listeners are about to find out, I was an unsuccessful screenwriter for a while, too. I lived in Los Angeles. I managed to write and get paid for screenplays that never got produced. It was a fun period of my life, but that streak in me, there's the journalist side of me that takes this very seriously and wants to chronicle these things for historical purposes, like I said, but there is the screenwriter side of me, the kid that just grew up loving bad 1950 sci-fi films, that always loves to speculate on the craziest, possibilities of these things, which is something that we have fun with our podcast, because there I get to be both the journalist and the wild speculator. But anyway, the crazy critter of Bald Mountain, as it was dubbed back in the day by, I think, local press, is just one of those great, rare two-shot deals. It hasn't been seen over and over again over the decades. It was not seen before this meteor landed, or at least before the 17th of November of that year, and it's never been seen again. And it's just one of those fantastic tiny flaps that deserves to be recorded, and it's something that I just love to write about and draw. And that basically it's just a blip. It's a blip on the cryptozoological radar, but that's where the fun stuff really lives.
One of the things that interests me about this story is, once again, the police sheriff driving up there and being turned around by unmarked military people. Now, did they have the area cordoned off? Do we know how long they were up there for? Or do we just have Sheriff Weister's report on this, like the quote?
The only thing that's come down the pipeline, and I have made efforts to talk to Weister, and unfortunately they have not met with success as of yet, or his family members. Now, that all we have is what he said, which is he tried to get up there and he was stopped. You have to imagine, if he was stopped, that there was a cordon, but I cannot say de facto that there was.
Right.
So this is another one of those things that is just infinitely frustrating to anyone who researches this stuff, and that is if the eyewitnesses are passed on. Now, this is a case, like so many of the ones that we cover that, happened in 74, not a million years ago, but still, 40 plus, it's very hard. I mean, Weister's gone. His family members are not interested in talking about it. And the people that were involved, are just a lot of them. It's when you talk to their family members, they're like, yeah, it's a family legend. It's fascinating. Uncle Roger told me about this thing, but you can't really get into the eyewitness's head because they're simply not available. But that's part of the frustrating thing. But then when you are lucky enough to get one of these cases that happened more recently, that's one of the main reasons I do what I do. It's like I want to make the next generation of people that are interested in these things slightly less frustrated by virtue of the fact that I asked the questions they wish they could have had they been there 40 or 60 or however many years ago.
Mm-hmm. And I can understand that. I really can understand that with it. When the family obviously doesn't want to talk about it, probably because they don't have any more information than what Mr. Weister had told them, or Sheriff Weister had told them at the time. So I can see where they're kind of backing off, saying, he really didn't talk much about this, or it's much like military people. Some of the atrocities and horrific sights that military members see after coming back from battle, they don't want to talk about it. It's just too painful to remember. Maybe in this case, too weird to remember. But Washington State does have a record of this, though. They really do, Rob. I mean, going back to 1980, when they were cleaning up from the eruption of Mount St. Helens, there is the alleged story that they brought in helicopters from McChord Air Force Base and Fort Lewis in order to pick up Sasquatch that were
and I've
seen
talked
in the air.
to a few different people that claim to have had unfortunately, second or third-hand knowledge of this. I have yet to track down an eyewitness, but this is one of those like great stories that you read about in an old paperback, which is where I first encountered it, and then you see it pop up on the internet, and you're like, I need to know more. Sometimes you get very, very lucky. I mean, the eruption was just the 80s. It wasn't as long ago as some other things, and it's one of those fascinating things. You think to yourself, and this is again where you have to be objective as a researcher, like, why would this happen? So if this is true, the government is interested in Sasquatch. Why? The government is interested in not letting the public know about this. Why? The government is going to take away the bodies. Is it for research purposes? For concealment purposes? A combination thereof? Again, why? Often I make lists like this for myself with the simple questions that need to be addressed if, presupposing something is true, if you want to get to the bottom of it. And that's one of those great scenarios where it's like, you would think there's an eruption. There is a loss of human life, certainly an immense loss of property. There are a lot of things that FEMA and the federal government need to be concerned with. It would seem that taking away the corpses of, heretofore unknown animals should not be amongst the top priority. So if it did happen, why? And that's just one, that's what excites me. That's what gets the juices flowing, because you're like, now I have to dig in. Now I have to see, what motivations the government could possibly have for wanting to do this.
No, and I can see that. I can totally see where the government would want to step in, especially if it is an alien-type creature like this glowing green blob of slug, whatever you want to call it.
Oh, this absolutely. An extraterrestrial is a different thing. I mean, I can't quite wrap my head around the motivations that the U.S. government would have for wanting to conceal the existence of Bigfoot. That there might be good reasons. It's worth playing with. But an extraterrestrial, that's something else altogether.
Right.
That's the possibility of access to technology or a biological entity that might well be toxic, infectious, otherwise dangerous. I mean, listen, I'm as guilty as anybody else of making out like big government to be truth-concealing villains in a lot of ways. And in some ways, I do think they are unnecessarily harsh about, not only hiding the truth, but hurting eyewitnesses that want to come forward, both, reputationally and sometimes physically. But sometimes you almost have to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, in some cases, they might literally be trying to protect the populace from something that might be potentially, very hazardous to the people living in the area, or maybe beyond. And of course, if this thing is intelligent, just because we don't have, animals that look like that seem to have human level intelligence, though that can be debated in some circles, on Earth, doesn't mean that this creature isn't, the Einstein of wherever it's from, and that it might be worth, communicating with and trying to, pick its brain, hopefully not through an alien autopsy, but through actual discussions. So yeah, no, I can definitely see why the government would want to put the kibosh on it, especially if it ends up it was an extraterrestrial, and especially if it had a vehicle. If that meteor that crashed was not a meteor at all, but a piece of technology, well, that would be something that any government would be very interested in.
Mm-hmm. Do we know if anybody went up there to look for evidence afterwards? Whether it was
I'm sure
for a ship, or maybe some of this luminescence?
There is no reporting on that at all. I've not been able to find, and that beautiful thing again about the internet is a lot of people have archived their whole runs of newspapers. A lot of publishers have done that, and it is a golden age of information. I know the 4 billionth person who said that, but for paranormal researchers specifically, this is arguably the best time to be alive in terms of access to things. Plus, you can just call local papers, which I've done with a lot of different cases, and sometimes they'll just take snapshots of it from their own archives and just email it to you, which is great. But in this case, I have not been able to find any newspaper reports on the crazy critter. and nothing that discusses what happened afterward. This is one of those ones where it becomes a cold case almost immediately. There's no discussion. Now, people that heard the legend, I'm sure, went up there looking for some sort of evidence or crushed undergrowth, or like you say, maybe. I mean, this thing, when you read about tentacles and it's glowing, your mind wants to make it slimy, because the things that have tentacles on Earth are pretty viscous. So you think, would somebody be up there looking for samples? Maybe the government was, and maybe they found it. It stands to reason, if there was a contingent of government agents up there, that it was not unrelated, especially if they're representing ostensibly NASA and the Air Force, and that if they found it, they probably would have done their darndest to get rid of whatever evidence remained that they could not remove, and that anything they could remove was. So who knows? Again, it's just one of those great, like I say, type X-File stories where it's there. It was reported. The interesting postscript by Sheriff Weister stating that there was a government presence just turns up the volume of weirdness 2 or 3 notches. And then, like so many of these cases, it just goes blank.
Weird. Very weird. My friend, I'm going to get you to hold on, because we are already through hour number 1 of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I think that was absolutely record time for an hour.
It goes fast, man.
Wow.
It's when you're having fun, like we always do.
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? I'm going to get you to hold on. In hour number 2, we are going to be talking with Rob Morphy about a couple of other strange critters. How about, let's go through the list. The Casablanca entities and the Potosi sheep slayer. We're going to get to those next with Rob Morphy from Cryptopia.us, coming up here on Spaced Out Radio in hour number 2.
Find your escape where time has no limits. It's about living today and cherishing the heritage of yesterday. A spirit of adventure for what is new, with the nostalgia of the past. Your timepiece is a reflection of who you are. Life surrounded by beauty, from the world around us to the soul within. EscapeWatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
The freedom to post what you want, when you want. That's the social media freedom you need. Social Media Freedom is the free app in your app store. No need to worry about going to jail or being shadow banned any longer. It's the freedom to say what you feel. The freedom to know Big Brother isn't watching. It's the way social media is supposed to be. Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free. Download from your app store today.
Coming September 28th to the 30th, it's our first annual Caribou Paracon, put on by Spaced Out Radio and the Canadian Society of Questers. 3 days of paranormal, supernatural, and spiritual knowledge in the beautiful 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Tickets are $150 Canadian for the event, being held at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Come watch our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Lorian Fenton, David Weatherly, Ross Allison, and more. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
Hi there, this is Tessa Nicole Thomas, and I'm going to take you for a ride every Sunday night on Spaced Out Sundays. I'm going to set up your week with some strange tales from across North America, from psychic readings, Sasquatch, UFOs, to the most haunted locations. Come join me at spacedoutradio.com starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, and let's get weird together. I'd love for you to join me. Spaced Out Sundays at spacedoutradio.com.
There's news, and there's The Encounter. This is Spaced Out Radio News Director Everett Thiemer inviting you to check out The Encounter. Our half-hour news segment every Monday through Friday night is different compared to what you're used to. Our goal is to bring you the weird, strange, and interesting stories the mainstream tends to leave out, and stories that will make you scratch your head in disbelief. The Encounter can also be found at spacedoutradio.com and on our Facebook page, SOR The Encounter. Come give us a read.
We're bringing scientific thought to the paranormal. Hi there, this is Spaced Out Radio scientist Chris Cogswell. Join me, Chris Zuger, and Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month, where we break down the who from the woo when it comes to everything paranormal. We'll investigate and try to bring sensible answers to those straight and sometimes outlandish questions people have. Hey, not everything has an answer, but we'll do our best. Listen in to Reality Paranormal only on Spaced Out Radio.
Heading to Vancouver and looking for some great nightlife? The Moose Vancouver is the place to be. Catch a game on one of the big screens or just come rock out to your favorite 80s and 90s hair bands. Great food starting at $6.95. The Moose Vancouver is open until 2 a.m. nightly. It's easy to find near the corner of Nelson and Granville. The Moose Vancouver is the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Do you want to know what's really going on in your world? Do you have questions about who you can trust in the mainstream media? Then look no further than the Rebel Planet. Come get the straight answers right here at spacedoutradio.com. Join me, Jamie Sexton, creator of Rebel Planet News, as I fill you in on the stories behind the stories. All you truth seekers, be sure to tune in to Rebel Planet on spacedoutradio.com the third Thursday of every month.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Hey, this is Canadian Paranormal Investigator Mike Moore. The third Wednesday of every month, I'll be teaming up with Dave Scott to bring you Ghosts of the Great White North. Each month, we will bring on guests from across Canada to discuss their ghostly encounters. Canada is a paranormal hotbed with stories you've never heard, so we're going to bring them to you. So get comfy on your Chesterfield, grab a donut, and join us, eh?
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag SpacedOutRadio. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Welcome back to the second hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Thank you so much for being with us. Tomorrow night on the show, Christopher Garitano joins us. We're going to discuss the Montauk Project starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern at spacedoutradio.com. Hello to everyone listening in on the SOR Radio Network and Deep Talk Radio. You can also find all of our archives for free, yes, free, on our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Beam Map. Beam Bap is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets the password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Really, what is Beam Bap? Seriously, Bill. Help us out. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you. You can rock out to Bumblefoot, shop at our store, read up on the encounter online, and so much more. Now, getting to our guest tonight, the crypto historian, Rob Morphy, is back. After an 18-month absence on this show, we're glad to have him back. His website is cryptopia.us. We are talking all things strange, man. And Rob, I cannot believe some of these stories that you come up with.
It's just, like I say, it makes my belly glow, and it just thrills the inner child in me to be able to bring my adult skill sets to bear on just some of these most extraordinary, assuming, and I do believe that many of them, honest to goodness, happened, some of the most extraordinary events in human history. And even the ones that maybe are a little more suspect, they're still a heck of a good story.
No kidding. No kidding. And you got to have a lot of fun in researching these, because every time something new comes up, you got to be like scratching your beard wondering, what the hell is this now?
All the time. I get piles and piles of books. I go to used bookstores all the time. My Amazon account is on like a constant rotation. I have shelves upon shelves. And you know what? I like to start with the old school stuff, the old beat up paperbacks, the great old collections of things. And then you'll just read maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs. You know they're probably not vetted completely well, and maybe, they're missing a few facts or have a year off or something, but it'll give you that kernel of something. And then you turn to the internet, and then you dig deeper and deeper. It is in those moments that I feel like an information archaeologist. It is my great joy. My favorite part about being a journalist was the research, actually. And you're right. I thrill to just reading a kernel of something that makes me go, oh my Lord, this is fascinating. And then digging deeper and deeper. And then sometimes it doesn't go much further because there's just not much information. Other times it literally explodes, like enough material to write a book about it. And I live for those moments. So yeah, no, it is an absolute sense of true glee I get from this.
How many of these are found in small towns where these urban legends are what the town now uses for, say, tourism revenue, or just that weird, strange story? I know in my community here, where I am in 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia, there's a story of a lady named Agnes McVie, who literally, the legend goes that she ran the post house, which is now at the museum, which is very haunted. But apparently during the gold rush days, she murdered like 55, 60 men to steal their gold and their horses. And,
wow.
And there's no information on it. It is a legend in this town, and it's even taught in the school, except nobody's really done the research to see if she's actually existed in this area.
Have they exploited it commercially? I mean, can you get McVie t-shirts and things like that?
Oh, I wish you could. I totally wish you could. But, but a lot of small towns out there, whether they're anywhere in the world, doesn't matter if it's Canada or the United States, there's a lot of towns out there who use these type of legends and lore as tourism revenue because people want something weird and something strange to talk about in their area.
Absolutely. And you know what? I loathe when that is used in sort of reverse reductive logic by skeptics. And I know we've been down this path before, but I will make my statement as I always do. I think being a skeptic is a healthy, good, smart way to be. A skeptic in the sense that you objectively look at the evidence and take it where it leads, and you don't come at it with a previously set bias. But skeptic in the sense that you are actually a debunker who has no room for anything that does not fit squarely into the accepted parameters of known science and academia, and that you will poo-poo everything else. These people that use the fact that somebody is selling a Loveland Frogman t-shirt or a Roswell coffee mug or a Scape or Swamp, Frisbee as evidence after the fact, that these things did not happen, because obviously it was this complex ruse by locals to eventually create a cottage industry that would make a couple of people a couple of bucks some decades later. I find that to be idiotic. Any smart chamber of commerce is going to take anything their small town has to offer and exploit it to help enrich its citizens. And I love that. I love it, A, because I'm a collector of said memorabilia, whether it's a Vermont Lake Monsters minor league ball club cap from the shores of Lake Champlain in Vermont to any number of T-shirts that I've collected from, just across the nation. I think that's fantastic. And I think that it's a great way for fans of the weird to find some sort of attachment to these really unique creatures. I think it's awesome that Folk Arkansas celebrates the Boggy Creek monster. And I honestly think cities that have legitimate legends that don't exploit it are making a terrible mistake, because it in no way cheapens or lessens the veracity of the events that actually took place. It's just a way to keep the legends alive. Now, if the commercialism comes literally at the same moment as the myth itself, okay, I can see where you'd be a little bit skeptical about that and cast a dubious eye. There's definitely been a very few cases of unscrupulous locals trying to create a phenomenon in order to monetize it. It's absolutely happened, but it has happened. It's sort of like voter fraud in the United States. It's one of those things where the mythology of how grand it is compared to the reality of how minute it is just miles and miles apart. So as far as I'm concerned, I think that any town that has a legend of a monster, or, like the Flatwoods extraterrestrial landing in West Virginia, certainly Mothman is a classic example. Point Pleasant, absolutely just doing the right thing by having the Mothman days every year and parades and a statue downtown. Of course they should. Every town, I think, that has a paranormal past should embrace it and celebrate it as much as they have.
You know what? And I agree with you. And, recently we just did our first annual Caribou Paracon up here, and that was helped put on by Spaced Out Radio. And one of the things that we discussed was, and I was quoted in the local newspaper as saying this, is why should, because Miriam Delicato had her alien abduction here just on the outside of town, and yet there are people in this town who absolutely refuse to talk about that story. And here I am saying, why? Why be that way? I mean, we have something really cool, and then you look at Shag Harbor, and I mentioned Shag Harbor in the article along with Roswell and what was the other one I mentioned? Point Pleasant with the Mothman, where they're making millions off of tourism revenue a year. And here in our town, we got the big three. We got UFOs/aliens, we got Bigfoot around the forests, and we got a very, very haunted community. Why not exploit that for tourism revenue rather than sweeping it under the rug? But a lot of these towns, like mine, and I'm sure you've seen this, Rob, where they are too embarrassed to attach their name to something like this.
It's absolutely true. And I don't understand where that stigma comes from, to be honest. I mean, obviously you and I are aficionados of this kind of thing. We're fascinated by it. We spend a lot of our, waking lives bringing it to the public. And so I guess you could say that maybe we're a little biased in that perspective, but I really can't fathom, just solely from an economical point of view, regardless of whether or not you have a genuine interest in the phenomenon, whatever said phenomenon may be, why you would not try to monetize it to help your community in general get on the map, and the citizens therein, to make a couple extra bucks to help, the economy in general. I've never understood that, and it always seems very odd to me, because it seems like a win-win. It catches on or it doesn't. At the very least, you're going to sell a little swag. You're going to, I don't know what kind of community. Once upon a time, I could see where it's like, we don't want to be known as the town where the chupacabra, killed 27 goats that night, or whatever the phenomenon may be. And like, we want to win the Tomato Fest, and we're known for our great gardens, and we just want to leave it at that. And all right, maybe in the 1950s that would have floated. But today, it just makes no sense. People don't have that kind of same sense of derision about this kind of stuff. Certainly, it's there, and we were talking about that earlier. But I think most communities that had anything like that happen would be glad to celebrate it and wouldn't mind at all being known as the town where such and such happened, especially, even if they're not interested in it, they could just roll their eyes and dismiss it. But if they are slightly interested in it, certainly interested in profiting off of it, then there's so much you could do to help the community.
Well, I think part of the problem, too, when it comes to these strange and weird things is, and I hate to use this term because I'm not trying to bash anybody when I say this, but I think the religious community still has a lot of pull in what is said and done in a community for reputation. As much as people are moving away from religious ideology and everything along those lines, I think there is still a market fear on being different or celebrating the paranormal or the weird, strange, and supernatural of whatever it is the community has. And I really strongly believe, and I may be wrong, and people may argue with me, and I don't think I'm that far out of context, but I really do believe that there is a huge, huge point where people are just afraid to admit and go against that religious sect of the community.
You might actually have something there. Certainly, in my experiences, the smaller the community, the more profound an influence the local clergy has, whatever it may be. And in some of these communities, you're right. Any kind of hint of otherness, especially if it's dealing with something paranormal. I mean, maybe they'd be willing to tolerate a UFO type thing, but not something that's spectral or something that tends to fly in the face of what an organized religion might espouse. I can see what you're saying there. It's funny. I've never really considered it so much from that point of view, but it seems like a very salient point, Dave. I mean, in especially smaller communities, being different is not necessarily being better. And these more provincial attitudes have a harder time being shed. It's funny because, since, say I was born in the 70s, came of age throughout the 80s and in the 90s, was in high school and then, adulthood beyond that. The celebrating the other, being sort of weird, back when I could grow hair, I had my big mohawk and just did crazy things. And sure, you were looked askance by some people, but you were sort of celebrated by the culture at large in a lot of ways. And so you think of it as almost like a thing of the past, again, that sort of 1950s provincial, look like everyone else, do it like everyone else, don't stand out. But it really hasn't disappeared completely.
No, and it isn't an insult to the religious community or anything. And, like one of the problems we're having here in our community right now is I run a ghost tour at the museum. And there are now people getting freaked out about the museum because there's rumors going around that there are demons all around the museum and that everything is demonic. And everybody who is part of the museum is like, no, we know this place is haunted, but there's no demons here whatsoever. But it's scary because on one hand, you raise a lot of money because I give everything back to the museum that we raise 100%. And they now have the potential of losing that revenue that they've never had before because of a rumor that people are starting about demons. So, I mean, people are afraid of these topics and they are willing to, go that extra mile in order to try and how can I put it? To try and ruin a reputation, even though they're not even paying attention to the good that it actually brings. And it is kind of sad, my friend.
I would agree with that. And again, this is a point of personal belief from my perspective. And I have no beef, absolutely no beef with religion or people that take great comfort from their faith. In fact, I'm all about it. I fully support it. But one of the things that I've never been able to brook is the idea that cryptozoological phenomenon and extraterrestrial phenomenon are demonic in origin. Anything that is not within like just the bounds of reality as we, consensus reality as we all know and accept it, is somehow malign. And certainly anything that's spectral, poltergeist, or anything like that, whether or not it seems to have ominous, attachments or nefarious intent, all of that tends to get lumped into the idea of, something that is supported by Satan and has a diabolical origin.
True that.
I can almost entertain the idea, I suppose. I could see where people are coming from if they think souls either go to heaven or hell, that if anything that's lingering behind, I don't believe this personally, but that, is a demonic mimic or something that's evil but pretending to be a dead loved one or whatever. I don't personally buy into that, but I could almost see it. But I've talked to people that have told me that Bigfoot is a demon. I just don't see that myself. I just don't think demons are flying saucers and playing hell in our skies. I don't know what they are, but that's just not my go-to.
No, and I would fully agree with that. And, all we need more people out there kind of expressing their interest in these, because I'll tell you, my ghost tour that I run is probably the most popular it has ever been, and yet it is getting the most abuse it's ever got in the past little while. So, I mean, it is a continual battle, but hey, there's nothing you can do about it. You just got to run with it. You just have to run with it.
You're absolutely right, and that's also the way of popularity. The more popular you get, the more foes can manifest themselves. That's the way of the world.
Isn't that the truth? All right, let's move on to another topic that you were covering. And this one, everybody will recognize the name because it deals with Casablanca.
They will recognize the name, but we are not going to bogey territory here. This is not an island, in the Mediterranean or Casablanca. I mean, what country was that? Now I feel like a fool. Monaco? Morocco?
I thought it was Monaco.
You know what? I just don't know, and darn it all, I'm ashamed for that, but I'm going to move on. This is a community in California, and it's freaking awesome. This case, I swear to God, is just one of the most extraordinary UFO encounters I have ever researched that has pretty much fallen through the cracks. It is a mass sighting. It is one of the longest on record. It is just over the top. I'm about to give it to you, but I can't overhype this enough. The fact that this is not a household textbook case for every fan of the unknown is astonishing to me. And I'm going to get into it right now. This began at about 2 p.m. in the afternoon on Sunday, August 22nd, 1955, in the Casablanca neighborhood of Riverside County, California. A group of kids ranging in age from about 4 to 15 years were playing in the backyard of the Douglas couple. One of the kids was named Kermit Douglas, one of those great names that is definitely from a bygone era. And he was wrestling with a buddy of his when he suddenly noticed this strange light in the sky above. He looked up, stopped wrestling, and told his friends, check this out. All of a sudden, they began to see these different, semi-translucent, multicolored UFOs, for lack of a better term. They were like half circles, full circles, radiating things, and they would appear and disappear with musical pings. The kids would call out for their parents. When they came outside, the things would disappear. So the adults wouldn't see them, but as soon as they went back inside, they'd manifest themselves again. So this went on for a little bit when all of a sudden a huge round object, which was compared to the size of 3 houses put together, started descending slowly to a football field that was maybe 2 or 3 doors down from the Douglas home. So the kids started grouping up to go down there, and that's when two of the boys that were a little bit behind saw this weird shimmering next to one of the neighbors' houses. A translucent being roughly the size of a 4-year-old child was floating just off the ground.
Oh, wow.
The creature had one leg, a single leg, a big red mouth, big red eyes, a shiny mirrored belt, and 4 round objects on its face which sparkled like diamonds. So basically beneath its eyes were these diamond-like things that essentially would look like nostrils, I guess, but very weird. The kids stopped and saw this. They started shouting and screaming. One of the kids was crying. He almost plowed his mother over when he ran into the house. Of course, she saw nothing. At this point, a boy named Marvin Sims claimed that UFOs began to descend from the sky, appearing and disappearing at a rapid pace. And this is when all hell breaks loose. One UFO knocks a branch off a walnut tree. Another one flew past with this long antenna which seemed to emit this strange kind of ray that was sort of illuminating the ground beneath it. At the same time, one of the boys in the group saw a disembodied, child-sized silver arm beckoning to it from midair about 20 feet away from him. The way it was drawn, because investigators descended on the scene almost immediately, was like one of those old reliquary arms that you find in like the museums of Europe that has like the bone of a saint in it, but it's got like these jewel-encrusted metallic limb, you know what I mean? Yeah. It sort of looked like that. It was just beckoning to it. Another boy at the same time told reporters later that a strange man in a field was gripping 2 futuristic-looking gun-like devices with which he temporarily paralyzed 2 of his friends that were running next to him. It was just then that an opening appeared on the side of that supergiant 3-house big craft that was in the football field. And that's when the entity inside of that came out that is just one of the most nuts things ever. It was described as being about 3.5 feet tall, again with red eyes and red mouth, sort of like the counterpart. It had undulating white flesh, so they said its skin was moving and rippling, almost as if, I guess, like a bed sheet in the breeze if it was hanging on a clothesline, but it was doing so in sort of a uniform way. And it gets even freaking weirder. The bizarre being had appendages that consisted of 4 legs that ended in rounded nubs, so that basically looks like sort of stubby tentacles. And here's what takes the cakes. It had 2 arms on each side that split at the elbow to grow into 2 sets of forearms with a hand attached to each. So 2 arms, where your elbow is, 2 different forearms shoot out in opposite direction, a hand on each one. So this kid this entity talked to one of the kids that was there named Ronnie Strickland. He said the entity told him that he should climb a nearby tree where he promised to pick the child up in about 15 minutes. So at this point, Ronnie Strickland goes into a trance-like state. His friends see him walk to the tree and climb it with another kid, and they're moving basically as if they're hypnotized. They get into the tree. Another UFO, there's dozens appearing and disappearing in the sky. This one they say was Saturn-shaped in that it had a ring on the outside that was slowly rotating. Approaches the tree. Little men, and that's all they're described as, is little men came out of the UFO onto this rotating rim and were trying to pull Strickland and his friend on top into the UFO. At which point their friends, which were in a stroke of genius, ran to a neighbor's house with a long hose and started spraying Strickland and his buddy, trying to snap them out of their trance so that they would not get on this UFO and maybe disappear. So one of the kids wakes up, but not Ronnie. Ronnie then turned, stepped off the branch, floated about 10 feet to the roof of that same house. So instead of falling, he just basically hovers over to the roof, at which point he stood on the edge of the roof and, still in a trance, stepped off, landed in a heap on the ground. Thank God the kid wasn't hurt. But at that moment, the UFOs all disappeared, just at once, almost as if they realized that things had gone too far, that a line had been crossed, and that someone actually got physically hurt. The kids that have been paralyzed by the strange, when they talk about that strange man with the future guns, I can't help but see Terminator. But of course, that's an 80s kid talking, not a 50s kid. It was probably more like Rocky Ranger or something like that, or Flash Gordon. But so Strickland's in a pile on the ground. The friends come and wake him up. Again, thank God he's unhurt. He had no recollection of talking to the creature or going up into the tree. None of the things that happened at the tail end of the scenario, and he refused to believe that he had stepped off a house. So at this point, the kids in the neighborhood are completely panicked. They're freaked out. The police are called. Reporters come down, and eventually 2 investigators from the Borderland Science Institute, which is a great name, and I think they're still in existence somewhere in California, 3 or 4 women that were great investigators with this group came out and talked to all the kids individually. So it's one of those cases where the information was gotten down quickly, and in a lot of detail, and one of them attempted to capture it in drawing. So we have all these great illustrations that have come down to us. When I came across this, like I say, I read about this sketchily in a few books when I was a kid, and I was like, I must find out more. I was lucky enough to find a report that was written by ufologist Isabel Davis and Ted Blocher. Now, this was written in the 70s, and thankfully it's on the internet now in the form of a PDF, so you can find it. And I have a link to it, I think, from our article. But basically, they talked about the year 1955 and what a banner year this was for bizarre encounters with particularly alien creatures, but also little green men, strange tiny Bigfoot-like creatures, like it went on and on. What's very interesting is that this Casablanca event happened on the exact same day as the Hopkinsville Goblin from Kentucky. Now, I'm sure your listeners are familiar with that, but that's when the farmhouse was besieged basically by these metallic, big-eared, wide-eyed, bulletproof little goblins, for lack of a better term. Sometimes it's called the Kelly Hopkinsville affair, but it's obviously one of the most famous in the history of ufology. And so that got all the thunder. But to me, this case is every bit as fascinating. It's got about 10 eyewitnesses. Obviously, the parents couldn't see it, which opens up a whole other just Pandora's box of theories regarding why they couldn't see it, what was going on. Ted Blocher, again, a famous old an investigator of UFOs, when he was writing about this case, he associated this. You know what? I'll just read his quote directly. This extraordinary incident, manifestation may be a better word, lacks sufficient information to come to any final conclusions. Even so, available data are sufficient to conclude that something bizarre and inexplicable occurred that afternoon at Casablanca, that the children alone were able to perceive it, and that whatever it was, it appears to be directly related to an area of the UFO phenomena suggestive of certain types of parapsychological experiences. And it's those last 2 words that I think are key, because you don't often get the parapsychological angle and the ufological angle in the same case. I mean, a lot of people imply, Jung, the famous, psychoanalyst talked about the psychological aspects of the UFO phenomenon years and years ago. But to deal with this idea that these things can maybe plant thoughts in minds, or maybe make it so adults or anybody they want can't see them, it goes into areas of intention and purpose that I think are A, some of the most fascinating aspects of the UFO phenomenon, and B, some of the potentially most terrifying, because that level of manipulation, it's scary on its face what they could do to the human mind, but also it makes you wonder what an agenda could be that would make for this to need to happen. So on all sorts of levels, the cinematic level, the fact that it is literally bat beep crazy in terms of UFOs in and out, rays being shot out of certain UFOs, future guys with guns, metal arms beckoning to children, floating one-legged weirdos and four-armed oddities. I mean, it's just, first off, I had a ball drawing it. I had a delightful time writing it. It's really just one of my favorite sightings of all time, and it really represents one of the most interesting mass sightings ever, and it happened over the duration of over 2 hours. So it's big in a lot of respects, and yet has really fallen through the cracks. Like, a lot of people have heard of it, but it is not a banner case like it ought to be, in my opinion.
Why do you think that is, Rob? Why do some of these cases, whether it's Flatwoods or any other of these weird, strange creatures, the Frogmen of Ohio, so on and so forth, just take right off? And yet a totally compelling story like this which probably would back in the day be racked up to, the devils of television and movies coming out that kids were being wrongly influenced. I could see that playing out in this, especially if adults were not seeing these creatures, because everybody back in the day wanted to blame everything on television, and that television was a bad influence, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's just the way society kind of went back then. Yet we look at it and we think, gosh, where were these creatures when I was growing up? Why didn't this happen to me when I was, growing up near a park by my house
It's funny, Dave, that you say that, because that was literally the first thing that popped in my head. Like, oh man, why could I have not been in this cavalcade of kids seeing this amazing, just absolutely astonishing series of events? And you're absolutely right. The 1950s, it was, Wortham wrote The Seduction of the Innocents, which was, demonizing comic books for all the ills of because it basically based on the precept that juvenile delinquents read comic books, ergo comic books cause juveniles to become delinquent, which is just de facto absurd on its face. And they did the same thing with TV, like I say, old Flash Gordon reruns, Rocky Jones Space Ranger, all of that, Buck Rogers. Surely they pinned it on a lot of that. But as to your first question as to why some of these take off and why some of these do not, of course that's, the biggest question in these things, like why are some things popular? Like we did a podcast on the Cryptonaut podcast, I think it was just last week, on the Dover Demon, super famous case from Boston. When we broke it down, it's an interesting case of the spindly-limbed, bulbous-headed, weird creature that was seen by multiple sets of teenagers, mostly that were just driving past it. One, though, that had a really scary encounter where he chased it thinking it was a local kid that had some illnesses, and he thought maybe he got out of the house and he was trying to take him back home to safety, only to go into the middle of the woods and have a face-to-face confrontation with this thing. Not much happens. And when I was done with it, I was like, in the end, the most fascinating thing about this Dover Demon is how it got so famous, because not much really happens. It's got a catchy name. It's an interesting, 2-day flap. I'm not at all throwing the Dover Demon under the bus, but I don't understand why, say, something like that is virtually a household name in the cryptozoological and ufological, lore, but something like the Casablanca entities is barely a footnote. And most people, this again, another one we did a podcast on, I got a lot of feedback from listeners saying, oh my gosh, I'd never heard about this. This is fascinating. Or I've only heard about this in just the tiniest little blurb, but I just don't understand why that is. I don't know. First off, I just called it the Casablanca entities. It doesn't have a catchy name. And as simple as that sounds, branding is key. If you have something called the Loveland Frogmen, the Dover Demon, any number of fascinating titles that these things get bestowed upon them, that catches on. If you don't get a name, almost out the gate that it won't necessarily catch on. But that's not the only thing. I think another thing is that some of these cases are very complex. They have a lot going on, and I think something as simple again as, say, the Dover Demon, or just seeing a group of frog-like, bulbous-sided creatures like the Loveland Frogmen, those are relatively brief encounters, though. And I know I tend to digress a lot. I did dig up some archival information on the Loveland Frogmen that I have not seen published anywhere except this one source. So I'm very excited to bring a redux of that to cryptopia.us soon.
Very nice.
and a podcast soon, because there are additional sightings that explain them more clearly from eyewitnesses that I have only seen in this source and never any other sources. So I'm super excited. This is where reports released as PDFs that were just parts of that were basically purchased by or financed by local UFO research groups that never got wide publication. Now that they are being made available to the wider world, it's a treasure trove, and you just never know what you're going to stumble across, especially something as well known as that. So that's going to be a fun thing for the future. But you just never know what's going to catch on. And that's another thing. I root for the underdogs. Why I like writing about a lot of these things, it's not that I won't write about the big names, but I do like the little engines that could of cryptozoology. I like to give them their leg up and try to draw as cool a version of them as I can, and to write about it as fulsomely as possible, and then hope maybe for the next generation they'll catch some traction, and maybe I could say, oh, I had a little hand in making sure some people that might not have heard about it did.
Do you ever wonder why none of these so-called entities or creatures are being seen or heard today? Like, we don't get the imaginary creatures, and I use the term imaginary very loosely, like this creature from Casablanca or the frogmen of Ohio or anything like that. We don't get that fun stuff anymore. Why do you think that is?
You know, I used to feel the same way. I asked that same question to my friends and people I had interviewed. I remember interviewing Lauren Coleman back in the day and other cryptozoologists, asking them those very questions. And, you know, I get different answers, but what I have begun to realize is that is actually not true. What the difference is that certain high-profile things have stolen the limelight with such ferocity, like the Bigfoot shows that have gotten popular, and the gray aliens that have just essentially usurped almost all alien-human contact research, at least in terms of what you see on television and documentaries. It is less that these things aren't happening and more that they just aren't being published and or broadcast in the way that they used to be. So weird things are still being seen every day, Dave. I get sightings reports from people all the time, and a lot of them are really esoteric and unique. And sometimes there's standard Bigfoots, and sometimes there's chupacabra or the typical lake monsters, and all of those are phenomenal. I have room for all of those, and I'm interested in all of it. But there are still many, many truly bizarre underground things. And I'm putting out these reports, and Albert Rosales, who did the humanoid catalogs, the Humcat reports, and there's others out there. There are definitely people out there that are writing reports on all of these things that they're hearing about either through eyewitnesses or collecting, as I do too, from older written sources. The thing is, they're just not getting the press. They are still out there. It's funny that we have more outlets for information than ever before, ever in the history of the human race, by all knowable standards, and yet somehow it's just like the big names that get all the press. And I find that fascinating and weird. That's a whole sociological study that maybe should be done by somebody better qualified at some point. But have no doubt about this, Dave. People are still seeing these strange, weird things. It's just that this used to be the bread and butter of the local newspaper. And then when the local newspaper would talk about a frogman or any number of these local things, then a wire service would say, hey, what's going on here? I'm going to do my old-time reporter's scoop voice. Let's put this out and see what people say. And so all of a sudden that would become a national story. And then maybe Johnny Carson would read about it on The Tonight Show, or somebody else would pick it up, and then one of like Brad Steger or any number of people that would just correlate these or collate these things and put them together in these paperback books I'm talking about. They would collect these newspaper reports, sparse as they were. Sometimes they do follow up. Oftentimes they wouldn't. They would just lay them out there, type them back up, publish them, and then that's how people would hear about them. So you would get exposed to these weird things because they were getting exposure. They're still happening. It's just, websites, wonderful though they may be, do not have the same kind of exposure that a newspaper did back in the day, especially one that carries wire service stuff. Or a book that's published that would be in like every airport and supermarket from here to Toledo. So it is a matter of seeing it rather than a matter of it happening. It's happening still.
Why then do we not get any reports of these strange creatures that were once seen? We don't, like, when's the last time somebody saw the Loveland Frogman or Vegetable Monster or whatever it may be?
The specific reasons for those could be varied. first and foremost, if something is, say, ostensibly extraterrestrial, maybe the flap was very short. For something like the Loveland Frogmen, you would assume, even though they did wield a piece of glowing technology, one of my friends calls it a malfunctioning Roman candle, but it looked like basically a wand that was erupting sparks at the end. So while my first instinct would be to say these things are from maybe the Ohio River, they're animals, likely amphibious, that are probably migratory and that they just showed up. But in this case, they were wearing clothes and had tools. So that's not what was happening. I can't say that they were extraterrestrial, I don't know, but if they were, then it would make sense that it would be one and done, basically, just like the vegetable man, like you're talking about, like the crazy critter, who either, is clearly not from the Washington area, so it either flew back off and its ship to wherever it came from, or it was captured by the government and whatever happened. Or maybe another scenario, but it's not indigenous fauna. So I think for things that are extraterrestrial, they left. I think for things that, and again, a lot of these weird stories, like I was saying, the Ohio River Valley is just riddled with strange, terrifying things like the indescribable Octo-Man, so called because the first person that reported it over like a 3-day series of lots of reports to the local police force described it as something they couldn't describe, which of course is paradoxical, but nevertheless, that's what they said. And this was a 8-foot tall, like 6 foot wide, like absurdly broad, bulbous-headed humanoid, not hairy, and it apparently had weird tendrils or tentacles coming off of it. The description was so bizarre that a local police officer was actually on patrol, very concerned, thinking that it was a car accident victim that had been knocked into the bramble by one of these rivers, came out covered in mud and sticks, and that's what was actually being described, just at a accelerated size because people were, paranoid and exaggerating. But for like 3 days, this thing was seen, walking around, climbing up off of bridges. I mean, it became a huge thing. And it happened not terribly far from Loveland. And this is another one of those funny things, like, why do we all know about the Loveland Frogmen, but not the indescribable Octo-Man? It's just one of those things you don't know. But it disappeared. Now, my thought is there's no UFOs at the time. There's no reason to assume it's extraterrestrial. But waterways would be a perfect way for something to travel and not be seen. Hardly ever. I mean, if you were amphibious and you did not want to deal with the human race, if we weren't a food source and we didn't have anything that would interest you, and you have even a modicum of intelligence, so you know that we're a fairly dangerous species and probably best to avoid, then you could, even being of a substantial size, probably manage to go your entire existence without ever having run into a person if you didn't want to. Now, whatever this creature's agenda was, maybe it was sick, maybe who knows? I mean, you could speculate till the cows come home why it was seen, but I'm saying that especially in the water, you could basically hide indefinitely and never be seen. So in some of these cases that UFOs are involved, I think we don't get many reports because the only reports we get are the people who happen to see them when they happen to be here. These other things, I think, they could probably conceal themselves fairly well. And they're maybe not as populous as, say, a Sasquatch. Things, or the skunk ape, the variations of that probably have slightly denser populations, live in certain areas, and that people are constantly going out with the specific purpose of looking for. So I think that's probably why they're more in the public consciousness and why these other things can fall through the cracks.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense. Totally makes sense. Let's move on to another one here, as we got about 8 minutes here before we got to go to break again. Wow. Way too fast. The Potosi Sheep Slayer. Give us the rundown on this. This
I'll try to do as quick as I can, because this is another one of those really great stories. This comes to us from Bolivia, 1967. So this is in a really rural, kind of mountainous, desolate region of the Southwest Highlands near Potosi, hence the name, in a rustic kind of province known as Apoco. And there, a 24-year-old herder by the name of Valentina Flores, she was a Quechua Indian who just lived off the land. She was illiterate. She had no idea what an alien or extraterrestrial was. Basically, she was there with her daughter. Her husband was in the city working. Her daughter was an infant and kind of strapped to her back with a thing called a manta, which is one of those kind of wraparound blanket papoose type things. You know what I mean? She was out herding her sheep and llamas. Her llamas escaped. She went to get them, returned about a half hour later, found her sheep were missing. Classic screwball comedy. But she didn't hear them. She saw their tracks, and they led to an old stone corral that was, not far from, where she had left them. As she approached this corral with her daughter strapped to her back, she saw that there was no roof on it. It was just basically a semicircle stone wall, that this weird plastic webbing was strung over it that absolutely shouldn't have been there. Sort of like the way I imagine it is, you ever seen like an animal stomach like tripe, this sort of weird, nasty, stretchy stuff? So this is over it. She got closer, looked over the rock wall, saw that 63 of her 64 sheep were eviscerated, just gutted. Blood everywhere, a complete massacre. Absolutely. In the center of it, she sees a little man kneeling on her last living sheep. She described him as about 3 feet tall. He was wearing a one-piece black suit, sort of like a diving suit, with red crisscrossing straps that were attached to this metallic, like, rucksack, which she said looked mechanical, like something somebody built. He had, and I love the way she described this, a red and abundant mustache, blue eyes, blonde hair, and a helmet with a propeller on it. So it's right out the gate, you're like, oh my God, this is like a children's show host or something, except that he's this brutal mass sheep killer, hence the name Sheep Slayer. So he has this hook-ended device that he's using to try to gut the last sheep. He's got a bag full of entrails next to him and a machine not far away from which there's a pole and this plastic meshing has come from. She sees him. She's enraged that basically her family's livelihood is just laying in pieces all over this thing. So she starts throwing rocks at this little guy. He jumps up shocked. He hits a button on this machine that's next to him. It sucks up the net just like that so that it's gone. She walks into this pen with all these dead sheep around her, pulls out a cudgel that she used for self-defense, which is basically a wooden stick with the end dipped in iron, and starts attacking this little guy. He starts throwing the hook at her, which is attached to a chain, and keeps flying back at him like a crazy Mortal Kombat sort of weapon, right out of a video game and a medieval weapons book. And she said that the only thing that stopped the hook from going into her chest and killing her was the knot that was holding her daughter to her back. But she ended up getting close enough to this man, for lack of a better term, hit his head, then hit his arm, and it broke. He, at this point, said, "I'm done fighting." He ran out of the enclosure, sat down in this metallic type chair that was sitting on a nearby hill. Rotor blades came out. Basically, it turned into sort of a Get Smart helicopter chair. He flies off into the distance with a bag full of organs, which eventually the government that came, the military came and did autopsies on the sheep and tried to investigate. They said it was lips, eyes, all the things you see in classic cattle mutilation. This thing, for whatever reason, this individual took all of these body parts, flew away on this piece of technology that is not like super sci-fi, intergalactic tech, but for 1967 is mind-boggling. And this poor woman is basically left in a sea of sheep corpses. It was such a devastating blow to her family that they actually had to move from the area and work in the mines, and it took them forever to get back on their feet again. The government came in, took blood samples that were left behind from this entity, the sheep slayer, took all of the sheep carcasses, basically said no one was to blame. There was no one they could, pin it on. They took off with everything, and we're left with a mystery that endures to this day. And to me, one of the most fascinating things was in this millennia, a famous Spanish investigator, J.J. Benitez, went and talked to her. And he found her, and he found that she was still illiterate. She still had not, she was shocked that he was interested in this thing that had happened to her like 30 years before. She did not know what an extraterrestrial was. She did not know what a UFO was. She did not know what this guy's agenda was. She just knew that this tiny humanoid with a big bushy mustache and this crazy weapon and this weird semi-futuristic tech basically destroyed her family. So it is one of those cases that is just both tragic on a human level, fascinating on an intellectual level, and that has been passed down incorrectly for a long time. A lot of people talk about him having a round black helmet that was smoky, almost like Mysterio from the old Spider-Man comics, and that spider-like legs came out of the metal rucksack, and that he moved around and flew off of his own accord. All of that is not how it happened. How it happened is this strange little humanoid man with a big old mustache, and wasn't even judicious about it. If it was cattle mutilation, I don't know why he just couldn't take a few parts. Killed 63 sheep, was working on the 64th for a pile of guts, and flew away into the sky.
I just love the mustache, man. You know me with
it's my favorite
high-quality
part.
facial hair. If I can get an alien with high-quality facial hair, that's an alien I want to meet.
Absolutely, except maybe a little less eviscerating.
Well, was this in the 70s? Because that sounds like this guy was maybe a time traveler or something, because the 70s mustaches were fantastic.
Absolutely. It was 1967, but there's no one saying that he couldn't have come from the 70s and traveled an inordinately short period back. You know what? There's legends, though, throughout South America of Caucasians with red hair, red beards. They're usually not that diminutive. That brought knowledge. Some people called them star people. Other people, scientists have said that no, they're clearly people that managed to migrate from Europe somehow, even though tales of these individuals way predate anything that Columbus did or the Spanish arrival or all of that. So there's legends of strange red-haired Caucasians from South America that were very civilized. One of the thoughts that occurred to me is sort of like, I don't know if you watch any of the Marvel films, but like Black Panther, that the idea of Wakanda being to the rest of the world this very backwards third world country, but to the citizens of that country, a hyper-civilized, very technologically advanced culture. And you hear legends of the lost city of Z and all sorts of missing tribes throughout South America.
Yeah.
Is there a possibility of a super advanced race of apparently tiny red-headed Caucasians that, for reasons I can't fathom, really want to brutalize sheep? I don't know. I really don't know, but it's a fascinating case.
And on that note, we got to go out to break for the final time tonight. From Cryptopia.us, Rob Morphy, the crypto historian, is here. We got him for another half an hour to tell all these weird and strange tales of cryptids around the world. It's going to get eerie. We got a couple more really interesting stories to tell you before we wrap things up and go to Olaf Phillips with the encounter for the day. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio. I'm your host, Dave Scott. We'll be back after this.
Are you tired of being blocked, shadow banned, or placed in jail for simply posting your thoughts on social media? Social Media Freedom can take care of that for you. Social Media Freedom is the newest and one of the best free new apps that allows you the freedom to post what you want when you want. It takes seconds to download from your app store. Come join the tribe at Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free.
The first annual Caribou Paracon is happening September 28th to 30th in the 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Brought to you by the Canadian Society of Questers and Spaced Out Radio. Come listen to our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Elizabeth Anglin, Paisley Town, Mike Moran, Eric Cooper, and more. It's a 3-day supernatural adventure at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Tickets for the weekend are $150 Canadian. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
A timepiece is a reflection of who you are, and what better way to show off the real you than with an Escape watch? Escape is a lifestyle brand accessorizing your days and nights. Choose to escape and create the life of discovery that you deserve. Dream, play, unite with your own personalized Escape watch. Head to escapewatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Find yourself constantly looking up in the sky, looking for answers? Have you had extraterrestrial contact? Are you an abductee? Looking for answers to your experiences? Hi there, I'm R. Keith Andrews, Spaced Out Radio's resident ET expert. Join me live the first Friday of every month where I take questions from the Spaced Out Radio chat room and help you understand those from the far-off world. It's 2 hours of knowledge every experiencer should listen to. Hope to see you there.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
The Call of the Wild is in Vancouver. The Moose Vancouver is one of the hottest bars and restaurants in the city. Open until 2 a.m. nightly, the Moose will rock you like a hurricane all night long. Great food with everything on the menu at $6.95 near the corner of Nelson and Granville. Get your horns up and come rock with us. The Moose Vancouver, the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from your 4-Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
You know, it's hard being the bad man of ufology, but that's just the way that I like it. This is Chris George Zuger, and I'll be hanging out with Dave Scott and SOR scientist Chris Cogswell for Reality Paranormal, the second Wednesday of every month. And our job is to break it down and come to conclusions as to what is really going on in the supernatural world. I'd love for you to join us and bring your questions for us to investigate right here on Spaced Out Radio.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
When it comes to the news, we look for the stories that the mainstream won't cover. Welcome to Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter. This is News Director Everett Thiemer. The Encounter is about the weird and strange stories that occur daily, and we scour the world looking to bring them to you. You can hear me with Dave Scott every Monday through Friday in our Encounter news segment. Read us online at spacedoutradio.com or check us out and give our Facebook page a like at SOR The Encounter. So come give The Encounter a read.
From the mile-high state of Colorado, sharing our signal around the world, I invite you to Spaced Out Sundays. Hi, I'm Tessa Nicole Thomas, and I'm closing out the week by taking you on a paranormal journey to the world of the weird. Ghosts, aliens, psychic phenomena, I will hit it all in your questions too. So let us highlight the paranormal for you. So come join me for Spaced Out Sundays starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, 12 a.m. Eastern, only at spacedoutradio.com.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook Spaced Out Radio Show. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back to the third and final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Great to have you with us. Tomorrow night on the program, we have Christopher Garantano coming in to talk about the Montauk Chronicles. We'll get going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern at spacedoutradio.com. We welcome back everyone listening in on the SOR Radio Network and Deep Talk Radio, and thank you so much for tuning us in. Don't forget our archives are free on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Bibimbap. Bibimbap is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets the password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you. You can rock out to Bumblefoot, shop at our store, read up on the encounter online, and so much more. For the final time tonight from Cryptopia.us, we introduce the crypto historian Rob Morphy. Comes in with the weird and strange stories that you won't find anywhere else except at Cryptopia.us. Mr. Morphy, this show has flown on by. It is so good to have you back on the air with us.
Oh, my pleasure.
So, we're learning about the Potosi sheep slayer. We've learned about the Casablanca ghosts, or whatever the hell that is. This is just some strange
entities, for lack of a better designation.
Yes, the critters, or the crazy critter of Bald Mountain. Let's get to the Pool Pyramid, my friend.
Now this is another one of those great, short and sweet ones. This one, I think, what fascinated me about it more than anything else was the fact. Well, it takes us back to the mid '60s, which is just a golden time for weird shit in general. But it's not necessarily super famous for weird stuff. So what I loved about it is that it's two young brothers that basically wake up and have from a nightmare scenario. And this entity enters their life that may be a machine, it may be an alien, it may be just their imagination. Let me just get into it. This peculiar and pyramidal, mechanically crab-clawed monstrosity seems to have stalked these brothers for at least a series of days. So one of the reasons that it is not... why some people are skeptical is the age of the children. So you've got 7-year-old Terence Druce and his 6-year-old brother Broderick, which, by the way, are the two most British names I have ever heard in my life. And their story happened in the coastal town of Poole, which is on the southern coast of England in the county of Dorset. The brothers shared a bedroom, as a lot of brothers would want to do. And in the dead of night, again in 1965, Terence claimed that he suddenly woke to see an inhuman entity hovering over the foot of his bed. Now, Leslie Harris, who was a writer for the Great Flying Saucer Review, I don't know if you remember that, but it was a publication from Britain that really chronicled a lot of the most famous cases, not only from Europe, but South America. Gordon Creighton wrote for them, a lot of great people. I believe it's been defunct for a long time. But Harris wrote in the February 72 issue that this triangular entity was about 4 feet in height, and interestingly, it was composed of closely fitting triangles of many colors, with thin black arms ending in crab-like pincers. So basically, my first thought when I first read about this was, do you remember all of those post-Rubik's Cube puzzles that used to come out in the 80s? Like the orb and the one with chains. Well, I remember there was a triangular Rubik's Cube, basically, obviously a Rubik's Pyramid or whatever. And so when I think of these triangles of many colors, I couldn't help but to think of that, so that made me laugh, with these black arms. So the kid screams. Of course he's terrified. It woke his brother, who also saw the thing right before it vanished. Now, as far as I've been able to ascertain, the official record gave no indication of whether or not these brothers reported it to their parents or what, if any, reaction they had, but they had to have reported to someone, otherwise no one would have known about it. The next encounter with this thing that is just fascinating is they were making their way home from school when they noticed Terrence first and then Broderick, the triangular thing lurking next to a parked car. So for a lot of people that would want to dismiss this as a bad dream one kid had, and then the little kid was just like, oh yeah, I saw it too, just to agree with his big brother, they're seeing it now in the light of day in a parking lot. Terrence stated that the apex of the object was approximately halfway up the window, and that it seemed to be crouching behind the car. But it was no longer multicolored. This time it was completely black. And Broderick noticed something new. He described this seemingly sentient triangle, because it was following them around, as having a nose or beak which protruded out near the peak of what I assume was its head, but near the peak of the point. So as if sensing it had been discovered, the triangular voyeur turned to continue to watch the boys. They took off, and the thing seemed to follow them for a little bit. They looked behind him. Then again, one last time, it was gone. So it's super brief. It's incredibly weird. It was seen by two small children, which I know a lot of people say, take it with a grain of salt. I'm one of them. I'm one of the people that says, yes, children, I don't necessarily think that all children are prone to be liars, but I do think that they have active imaginations and maybe can be a little loose and fast with their chronicling of reality. But I also say that if they're sincerely reporting something that at first terrified them and then still continued to disturb them, that seemed to have not only an active interest in observing them while they sleep, but following them during the day, that's something that, well, it's worth looking into, especially if you're one of their parents or local law enforcement, but it's also worth wondering, what agenda could this thing possibly have? Is it nefarious? Is it simple curiosity? And I think what intrigues me most is just, is it robotic? Is it non-traditional biology, maybe silicon-based? And in what world could a triangular, seemingly intelligent being come from? Because we don't have anything that remotely fits that description on Earth.
Mm-hmm. Once again, when it comes with children, we do have to worry about that imagination. What kind of clues are there that makes this story seem so real rather than some sort of childlike yearning for attention?
That's a good question. And I think what I'm giving credence to it for is Leslie Harris, the woman that reported it in the Flying Saucer Review. It's not to say that, that I think her instincts were above reproach in that, or his. Honestly, I don't know the gender. But I know the work of Harris. And I know that the things that this individual reported always seemed very credible to me. So the only thing I can say, because obviously it's a pretty scant story, it doesn't give you a lot to hang your head on. It happened so long ago, I've never been able to have any contact with them. I have tried to find the brothers. I have not found them. But the fact that Harris took it serious enough to write it down and publish it is the only thing I can say that at least lends to it the sense that this person, whose work I am familiar with and whose work I've always appreciated, they gave it that semblance of credence. So in deference to them, I will too.
I would like to ask you more on this, but we are running out of time, and I want to get to one more here, if you don't mind, because we only got you for about another 15, 16 minutes. I got to know about Vegetable Man. This is just, honestly, dude, has it really come down to Vegetable Man?
Oh, absolutely. You know what? And you know what? There's going to be Fruit Man. There's going to be Food Pyramid Man. No, the problem with Vegetable Man right out the gate is that it is such a horrible name. Like, I love bad monster movies. I always have. I'm a sucker for the stuff from the 50s, that horrible like tree monster thing from Hell It Came. Like I could go on and on. I won't because I know we're running out of time. But Vegetable Man is a terrible name for a really kind of fascinating one and done run-in. So this happened in West Virginia in July of 1968. A U.S. Air Force veteran by the name of Jennings Frederick was bow hunting for woodchucks just outside of a city called Fairmont. And what happened was, as he was hunting, he was not getting any luck. He decides to call it a day when he hears a high-pitched jabbering, much like that of a recording running at high speed. We've all heard that sound. So he's like, what the heck is going on? He looks up, and just to his eternal shock and probably chagrin, he sees looming above him, about 7 feet tall, a skeletal green entity with a stalk-like frame. And when I say skeletal, I mean literally its arms were about the width of a quarter. Its torso impossibly thin. This is not a human being in a costume. This is a stalk of celery with limbs and weird branch-like protrusions sticking out of its head. It had semi-human facial features like a mouth and these big kind of downward slanting eyes, which is always ominous and sort of villainous. It had long ears which sort of branched off like kind of branches, literally, and its eyes were yellow. So he's looking at this thing, and he's hearing this weird, mechanical, speedy sound. When he glanced down, he noticed that it had 7-inch fingers that had syringe-like protrusions at the tips, which were kind of unnerving to him, and with good reason, as it'll turn out. Frederick was trying to just overcome the panic and deal with what was going on, and his brain, you know how sometimes you hear something and you don't process it and then it clicks? He realized that the thing was talking to him in English, although it was sped up, and what it said was, and this is it verbatim, "You need not fear me. I wish to communicate. I come as a friend. We know of you all. I come in peace. I wish medical assistance. I need your help." But before he could respond, it took its 7-inch fibrous fingers, wrapped them around his hand, and embedded these thorn-like syringes inside of his flesh, at which point an excruciating jolt of pain ripped up his arm. But before he could tear his arm away, he was staring into this leafy thing's yellow eyes, and crimson-like tendrils that looked like blood began seeping in to the big, bright yellow eyes. And as they seeped in, they spun and spun until they formed this sort of spiral circle. Like we're talking like classic old-school carnival, hypnotic, spinning pinwheel kind of thing. And as he stared in those like hypnotic pinwheel eyes, he felt that the pain was dissipating, and he kind of fell into this anesthetic stupor. All of a sudden, the creature broke its grip off of him, so it sucked whatever amount of blood it apparently needed, at which point the pain totally rushed back into Jennings' arm, and the Vegetable Man just backed away and ran up a hill with these giant steps. Each step, he said, was a leap that consisted of 25 feet. So each giant sprinting step leap up this hill was a 25-foot bound. It disappeared over the crest of the hill quickly. He was left in a shock. He heard a humming, vibrating noise, which the bow hunter assumed was this creature's UFO taking off. That was just wild speculation on his part. But, the man was just, exsanguinated to a degree and had the shock of his life. So I think we can cut him some slack in coming up with crazy theories. The Vegetable Man was never seen again. He reported it, obviously was ridiculed by a lot of people, but some people took his account seriously because he was a military man. A lot of people that knew him said he was a reputable source. But it's one of those really bizarre, one and done again encounters with something that is utterly inexplicable. There's no reason to assume it was an extraterrestrial except for a strange humming sound. But of course, we're not seeing, 7-8 foot tall vegetable men that are impossibly thin wandering around everywhere. So, it would actually stand to reason that maybe it's from somewhere else. But again, it's just one of those great cases where it's speaking English, it asks this man for help, and maybe that's really what it needs. Maybe for some reason it needed human blood. I don't know what a plant could possibly use it for. Maybe to feed, maybe like a Venus flytrap, it's carnivorous. Maybe it was for a medical experiment. Maybe it was a lie, and it just wanted to suck some blood and take off. But if it wasn't so ludicrous, it would be utterly terrifying.
See, this is why I always make sure I carry some sort of salad dressing with me.
That's
just
important.
in case. Just in case. You know, you never know when you're going to need some high-quality salad dressing in order to make things a little bit more safer in your life.
I think Thousand Island is like a crucifix to a vampire, to a vegetable man.
Exactly.
You know, I'm pretty sure that would be, if he just had it handy, if he was as smart as you, Dave, that incident would have been over before it began, and he would have saved himself a couple of pints. But he wasn't. He was not prepared.
This is why I want to run into like Bacon Man or Pizza Man. You know what I'm saying?
That would be delicious.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
You imagine some Pizza Man creature, Rob, running through the forest trying to hunt you down, and then all of a sudden you realize it's shaped as a pizza, and then you stop and you're like, what am I worried about?
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to eat this damn thing.
No,
turn the tides, people. Turn the tides.
You become the beast.
Exactly. Exactly what I'm talking about. Exactly what I'm talking about. No, but seriously, looking at this creature, it reminds me of the Wizard of Oz. Remember when they were walking through the forest right before they meet up with the lion and the trees start tossing their apples at them? Like the trees come alive? That's what this almost seems like.
Oh, you know, it does. And even in a more terrifying way, the horrible scenes from the original Evil Dead where the branches, you know, became alive and did terrible things to the victims. The thing that, abject absurdity of the story aside, I understand. This is one of those ones that I take with a grain of salt, and for a lot of reasons, but mostly because it is just so over the top. I chronicle it because I'm fascinated by the weird stuff, but this does not say rank as high as a lot of them in terms of the believability meter that I have. But what intrigues me about the idea of a sentient plant-like creature is that you picked a really good planet to either be from or visit if you want to conceal yourself really well. I've written about things like the Moss Man, which is this strange mass of, I guess, Spanish moss and glowing eyes that was seen in Florida, for a couple of decades, from like the 70s even until the 90s, and other things like that. And it's like, this is a really good place to live if you are basically a sentient plant. You can hide almost anywhere. If you don't, if you need human blood to survive, then, well, all right, you're going to run into people, and that's going to be treacherous. But if you can survive on animal blood, you could pretty much go without ever bumping into a human, just like I was saying earlier, with something that lives under the water. If you can just freeze at any given time and fade into a forest, you're never going to be seen. So again, I take this one with a grain of salt, but the idea of living, intelligent, plant-like creatures is one that I have a special soft spot for, because there's been some really interesting cases of people that have said to have seen these things, or even moving trees, all sorts of crazy stuff. Stumps, that's an article I have on cryptopia.us. If anyone's interested, you will know exactly what I'm talking about once you read it. But I mean, if you are like this, and you are basically a plant or look identical to a plant, you've picked the right planet to be on if you want to go undetected.
Oh, tell me about it. However, they have their own nightmare of their own. You imagine, all you got to do is the police don't need to go hunt this thing down. Just bring the vegans in. They'll go get it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I went there.
You did.
I did.
And I'm glad you did. Somebody had to.
Now, this was a case, if I look at it, Brad Steiger actually wrote about this. I mean, this one even tripped him out.
Oh, absolutely. And bless his heart, man. Rest in peace, Brad. He really, he did a great job of taking all of these stories from all these different UFO journals and newspaper accounts. Just like I was saying earlier, a lot of people did it. Some people did it and just, whipped them out there to make a couple bucks. But he really spent just so many years of his life just writing about all these fascinating things. And I've got to have at least a dozen of his books in my collection. And I've always enjoyed it. And in fact, it was his writings where I first read about the Vegetable Man. And it just, people like that really laid the groundwork. Obviously Charles Fort in the beginning, and Frank Edwards. I mean, I'm obviously going to miss a lot of the greats, but over the years, it was going to the local library, reading the books by these people, where they're just basically reporting what is already out there. And leaving it up to you. Of course, back in those days, either you found another book that told you more, or you found nothing. Now you can find so many different sources, and it really kind of infected me with this lifelong curiosity and a desire to know more. Because back then you'd get just this taste, like a little article by Brad that would just whet your appetite. Now you can just dig deeper and deeper, and I think that's one of the reasons I write such long and involved articles. A, I'm loquacious, as your listeners all know by this point, and B, because I love getting the maximum amount of information I can about anything I'm interested in. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to present that to the readers.
And I don't blame you for that. I think that's smart and logical for your readers. Now, I mean, this is another one of those creatures where we think, where the heck has this been? Why have there not been any other sightings of this creature out there? Because, I mean, something like this, if it's alien or if it's not, really doesn't matter. But you look at it and you're like, this has so many possibilities for not only some sort of B-rated horror movie, but, I mean, it's just out of this world. It is absolutely out of this world. Like a blood-sucking vegetable. It's just weird.
Totally. I mean, it's Howard Hawks' The Thing. It's like I said earlier. There is the. I'm not a scientist. I have been lucky enough to be called a cryptozoologist by some really esteemed members of the field. But even that, I would be dubious to give that. I've been in field expeditions in like Louisiana and South Africa, a few places, but I'm a crypto historian. I like to take the information and present it the best I can. That is where I feel most comfortable. And there's that part of me that even though, like I say, like I'm not a scientist, I want the facts out there, but there is the fanboy in me. There is that sci-fi loving horror film kid that grew up at the drive-ins that just loves old horror films, the worse the better. I mean, I love lousy movies, as you well know. And so when I read a story about something like this that would be the source of a great, terrible movie, it makes me love it all the more. It really does.
I don't blame you, my friend. We only got about 2.5 minutes left with you tonight, and this has gone by way too fast, Rob. And we cannot allow you to wait another 18 months before you come on the show again.
I agree.
I'm just going to have to put the law down here. But we will work something out to get you on again very, very soon. How much fun do you have doing this? Honestly, when you get to, somebody brings up some sort of like garbage pail kid that's actually true from the sticker books back in the 70s and 80s. I mean, how much fun is this?
I love it. I love it because basically I was the kid who, had a sketchbook and I was doing my best, doodling monsters, hoping someday I could draw half as good as the animators for Scooby-Doo. And I'm not even sure I've achieved that yet, but I get to draw monsters. I get to write about monsters. I take it seriously, and I really do have a deep and abiding respect for these mysteries. But I still, as I've said numerous times tonight and say all the time, I am still a kid at heart. I still love loving this stuff. So the fact that when I read about one of these weird things and I get to do this and I know I get to draw this, and I get to write about it. And then on the Cryptonaut podcast, I get to talk about it. It's literally a dream come true. Like, I am living the life I have always dreamed of living, and I am just honored and delighted to be able to do it.
I love that you do, my friend. Do me a favor, if you don't mind. Could you tell everybody your website, your podcast? Let everybody know where they can find you, because people need to be able to stay in touch with you, my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you. First and foremost, the newest endeavor, the one I'm very proud of, is the Cryptonaut Podcast. You can find it at cryptonautpodcast.com, iTunes, Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, basically everywhere you can find podcasts. I want to state for the record, it is not safe for work. It is not for small children. It is an adult, fun, informative, and just entertaining take on the wild, weird world, but the wild world of weird, but it is definitely not for small children or the elderly. Well, the elderly, it's fine as long as it's not your church-going grandma. You can go to cryptopia.us, which is the site that's basically started it all, where you can find all the articles and lots of my artwork. And then, you can find us on Facebook.com/CryptonautPod, Instagram.com/CryptonautPodcast, Twitter.com/CryptonautPod. So all the social medias, you can find the Cryptonaut Pod. And if anyone's interested in seeing my artwork, you can find that at robmorphy.com. So I would love it if anyone wanted to check it out and let me know, because I love talking to folks and getting feedback. It's one of the great joys of my life. And Dave, I want to tell you, I really appreciate this chance. I have loved being back on talking with you, man. I've really missed this, and it's been a real honor for me and a real pleasure to talk to you and your listeners.
We're going to do it again, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on Spaced Out Radio. We'll talk to you very soon.
Be well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Rob Morphy. And now we're going to present the new encounter with Olaf Phillips from The Encounter and Paranoia Magazine.
This is the winter of our lives. We come to play the final scene. The curtains closing in the darkness we expose what lies beneath.
We are entering The Encounter tonight on Spaced Out Radio, where each and every night we bring you the weird, the strange, the WTF. However, we've made a little bit of a shift. Everett Thiemer, the president of Team Stump and the news director of Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter, is working now behind the scenes to put our news section together. So we got Olaf Phillips coming on in from Paranoia Magazine, where you can also maybe check out some of his articles, paranoiamagazine.com, to bring us the weird, the strange, and the wacky in the news that was. Mr. Olaf Phillips, welcome to the Spaced Out Radio team.
Hey. Yeah, I'm very excited.
I'm glad to have you here as well, because, you've been on this show numerous times as a guest. I think you're one of the leaders in actually appearances on this show. And now you're doing the news. Everybody knows you as the secret space program type of guy, the black ops type of person. But around here, nobody really knows you as Paranoia Magazine editor.
Well, I am the editor and I'm the publisher of Paranoia Magazine. I do have a chief editor, editor-in-chief, I shall say, but we work on the news together.
So how much strange and weird is out there? Give us a rundown of story number 1 for tonight that you have found for The Encounter and Paranoia Magazine.
Well, I know you've been following the sex doll brothel over in Houston. There's an update.
Oh, is there?
Yes. Apparently, they have actually denied them the ability to have it. According to Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner, you cannot engage in sexual activities with any inanimate objects at a business. So they have been denied.
Oh, no.
The company, the company, Kinky's Dolls, Yuval Gravel, I'm probably butchering his name. I'm sorry. I'm terrible at names. They are looking at appealing the decision. He is quoted as saying, "We are investigating our options." So these guys, they've been cut down.
Oh, my goodness.
No,
what are
no
the perverts going to do out there, my friend? What are the perverts going to do?
Apparently, they're going to go to Toronto, where they actually have one of these up and running.
Yeah. You know, this was actually front page news on the British Columbia newspaper called The Province here about 10 days ago that they want to get one here. And the big question still becomes, and Everett and I had talked about this, and numerous people are talking about this, is that legalized prostitution?
Yeah, it's a big question because it is an inanimate object. So, you know, it really comes down to, you know, what is prostitution? And, you know, it's not I have to admit that in my zone of things to discuss, it's not generally something I discuss. But it is a very interesting question because it is an inanimate object. So, you know, I don't know.
I don't think I'm a fan of it. I really do not think, Olaf, that I'm a fan of this. And good on the city of Houston for doing this because, you know what? I hate to use the word deviancy. I really do hate to use that word. But there's just something weird and strange about this that I don't know. I mean, if your game is that weak that you can't even pick up somebody on one of these dating websites, whether it's Tinder or Plenty of Fish or something like that, you shouldn't be in the game in the first place.
You know, my opposition to it is not so much about the deviancy of it. I think that, you know, whatever people want to do in their own house, their own business. But my question is more of public health because, I mean, you know, if you're going to rent these out, you know, you have an implied requirement of public health, right? And I think that would be very hard to maintain. So I would approach it from a public health point of view.
And that's really a good point in the whole public health scheme of things, because, I mean, all of a sudden now, I mean, who do you hire? I mean, it's like a food inspector. Now you got to have this inspector going around having to check out all of these dolls. And that is just, it's eerie. It's just absolutely eerie.
It's eerie. And I think that it also, I'm wondering if the city of Houston has seen it as a slippery slope. That once you okay this, and maybe they have a lot of rules around it or whatever, but once you okay it, you know, you've got a public health problem. And you know what, I think they're concerned about what comes next. What's the next inanimate object you're renting out, right?
Well, I mean,
because
I think
it
it
could
opens
really
up,
be anything.
I think it opens up an increasingly big Pandora's box to sexual deviancy. That's why I am not a fan. Like, what's next? Not to sound grotesque on this or anything, but what's next? Do they allow, you know, silicone animals? Because there's people out there who have fetishes with that. I mean, it's sickening to talk about, but where does this stop?
You know, or, I mean, there are people that have, you know, that have an interest in structures, buildings, right? I mean, it, you know, where does it end? And I think they're wisely trying to stay out of that. Just say, you know what, you can't do stuff like this. If you want to do that, buy the doll and take it home. You know, do whatever you're going to do with your doll at home. You know, which is probably the safer point of view for regulation.
Now, are some of us just mad that we didn't think about this? Because it's going to become the next probably multi-billion-dollar industry in the sex trade?
You know, I'm not angry. I didn't think of it. I'm afraid. I'm okay with that.
But I'm sure there are a lot of people, Olaf, who are kind of PO'd that they didn't get on the bandwagon.
I don't know, man. You know, it's a little out there. But, you know, the problem, this particular problem has a more wide-ranging scope. And I think that it will become more of a problem down the road. I mean, they're obviously kicking the can down the road, but I think that once you get into, the question of simulation, that's something that's going to come around eventually.
Well, let's see where it goes. Let's see where it goes, my friend, because this has the ability to be very, very ugly. Very ugly.
I think the question really comes down to, on one hand, it's a little titillating to talk about the notion of using having a sex doll brothel, but I think the bigger question is down the road once you've got robotics and things like that.
Agreed.
I think that's when it's really going to become an issue.
All right, let's move on to story number 2.
Okay, so I came on the Huffington Post. Apparently, they're tracking a story about aggressive mountain goats in Olympic National Park. And apparently, there's a group of very aggressive mountain goats that are addicted to and thirsting human urine and sweat. I know. Long pause. I think they call that a pregnant pause.
Pregnant pause, yes. In radio, it's called.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to respond to that. So they're attacking people to lick them?
Yes. They have killed one hiker, and they have become such an incredible nuisance for stalking hikers that they have actually been airlifted out of Olympic National Park in Washington.
Wow.
They actually killed a hiker. The official statement is mountain goats can be a nuisance along trails and around wilderness campsites where they persistently seek salt and minerals from human urine, packs, and sweat on clothing. They often paw and dig at areas on the ground where hikers have urinated or disposed of cooking wastewater.
Wow.
And according to the Telegraph, one hiker bled to death in 2010 after being attacked by a goat. The animal had stalked the hiker for more than a mile.
No kidding. That is one focused goat, man.
It's such a big problem. At least 375 goats will be airlifted to forests in the North Cascades, with between 275 and 325 others possibly killed in coming years to further reduce population.
Wow.
Now, so far, of the 115 goats captured, 98 have made it to their new location, 8 died, and 3 were euthanized. And the comment from the Forest Service spokesman, Colton Whitworth, can't make that name up, so far, they all seem to be doing pretty well. Only 8 died and 3 were euthanized.
Only. Good job, goats. Good job.
Yeah, so the solution is that for these extremely aggressive mountain goats that are addicted to human urine and sweat, we'll just try to put them where there are no people.
No kidding. Wow. That's just scary, though.
I thought that was...
Have you ever seen mountain goats up close?
I've never seen a mountain goat up close, but I'll tell you a funny story. The first time I ever went to the East Bay Wall, right? There's this enigmatic wall not far from my house.
Right.
I hiked up there with my son and my oldest son. And when we got to the top, we were tired because it's a long way. And so, we hung out. Excuse me. We took measurements, tried to figure out orientations of the wall and all this other stuff. So we decided to leave because it's like, okay, well, it's going to take us a long time to hike down. We got to get out of here before it gets dark. There's mountain lions, whatever. We really got to leave. So we go to walk down. And as we had been going up, in the distance, we had seen cows that were kind of migrating up toward this location. And I guess they go up there to eat the grass or whatever. There's really nothing up there. It's high enough that there's really no trees or anything. But on the way down, we were walking down the road, and the cows are kind of grouped in the center of the road. Oh, okay, well, they're cows, we'll make some noise and they'll run away. Whatever. And a bunch of them trotted off to get away from us, the annoying humans. Let's go away from the annoying humans, right?
Yeah.
Except one. There was one cow, and that cow stared at us. and it would not stop staring at us.
Intimidating stuff, man.
Yeah, and it was very intense. And as we tried to walk around it, the cow watched us. And the cow, when we got past it, the cow followed us.
Weird.
Just one cow. It kept following us. I don't know what the cow was thinking, but it was like demonic. And eventually we got a little scared, because this cow was like following us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we decided to cut down the hill to take, because down below the road kind of serpentined.
Right.
And so we cut down the hill through the brush to get down lower because we had to go away. The cow wasn't going to follow us. That cow was watching us, following us, and stalking us. It was very
weird. Very
weird. That's a weird story about the goats. They are very, very scary.
Yeah, we got the goats around just south of me by about an hour here, and they don't care. They'll be right on the highway, man, and they will.
Yeah.
Yeah, they get smoked by cars and everything. They just don't care. They really do not care.
I just thought when I was reading these, I'm out there doing my best for you, Dave, and I'm looking off a lot of weird stories.
Oh yeah.
But that one seemed really odd to me that they were addicted to human sweat.
That is kind of gross, man. I'm not going to lie.
It's really gross.
That is really kind of gross. Let's move on to story number 3.
Okay. Story number 3, time traveler who went to the year 8,973 and met telepathic robots passes lie detector test.
Yes.
So William Taylor said he was sent by the British government, this was from the Mirror, sent by the British government to the future reality where human cyborgs live forever. A man who claims to be a time traveler says he went to the year 8,973, met telepathic robot-human hybrids in a project sponsored by the British government. He later passed the lie detector test in which he described his jaunt into the future. He claims he spent 6 hours in the year 8,973 and said, I quote, never wanted to come back, as it was a utopia where there was no crime or conflict and there were cures for every problem. He said he was part of a secretive project run by the British government. He claims that he met cyborg-like residents who had abnormally large heads and eyes and small mouths and were gifted with immortality. The alien creatures seemed to be descendants of human beings that could communicate with telepathy, he says. And he says, despite this, Williams claims that he was able to talk to them in English. But he passed the lie detector test.
Yeah, but who issued that lie detector test? I mean, we've talked about this a couple times on the show. I mean, there's nobody of, like, when you're flashing on the video truth or whatever it was in green code, how do you take that seriously?
Yeah, I get it. But, I mean, lie detectors, although in the U.S. at least, they can't be admitted as evidence because they can be faked. As long as the guy, I mean, if the guy passed the legitimate lie detector test, that would be very hard to do and to fake it. You have to be trained to fake a lie detector.
True.
So it's because it's not, it's a combination of things, right? They're testing, your heart rate, your respiration, and the amount you're sweating, as well as how you're moving. So you really, I mean, there are people that can pass one, but they are trained to pass one. Because 99% of the world will panic if they start lying on a lie detector. So to me, it's very interesting that he passed it. I'd like to see more about it, who issued the lie detector test, and to have somebody with a pedigree issue that lie detector test. Mm-hmm. But it makes you wonder if he indeed passed the lie detector test.
Well, this is kind of the issue that we have here, right? Is that we have this gentleman out here who is claiming that he passed it, but they don't give any source of information on who took that test. You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's the mirror. It's the mirror. They're
Well,
not
of
going
course.
to they're not going to go that far.
No, I mean, why try and make the truth out of things? I mean, heaven forbid if this
Heaven
could be such a great story. I mean, why ruin it? Right? Why ruin it?
I think for him though, the guy who says that he went, I think that he, if he wants to own that story and not just have it be a byline in a weird article, I think that he should own it and go and find somebody and say, look, this guy worked for the Ministry of Defense, as it's in England, I guess. Or this guy worked, for the Metropolitan Police or whatever, and really own it and get out there. Because if he can indeed actually pass a lie detector test, and then saying that he went to 8,973, he got a story to tell. You know?
Yeah, and the guy would probably be dead in no time.
Probably, but it also makes you wonder that over time we've seen a lot of stories about time travelers like John Teeter and others, and I think a lot of them, Teeter included, were hoaxes of some sort or another. I've never seen compelling evidence that any of them were real. And there's also a paradox that exists with time travel. And the paradox is the idea that when you actually, if you were able to travel in time, you could never go back further than when the time machine was created. And if these are indeed real, if it is possible, which I'm not entirely certain it is, if somebody had actually done it, it'd be interesting to have some real honest to God evidence. Because, I've heard of time slips. I have a friend who actually experienced the time slip, and that's a situation where, you might be driving along and then suddenly you find yourself in a different era.
Mm-hmm.
I know somebody that actually happened to, and I believe him because I know him. And he may be a lot of things, but he's not going to lie about that.
Right.
So I think it is possible on a natural level, call it a bubble in space-time or whatever. There's a lot we don't understand. But the idea of building a time machine, I don't think is possible.
I would agree with you. We got about 2 minutes before we got to go to the thought of the Dave, so give us the last one.
Satan ruled out as experts puzzle over mysterious flaming pit in Arkansas.
Nice.
This is the quote. He didn't come up with and stick his pitchfork in the ground and blow the hole out. So apparently in Arkansas, there's a hole in the ground that's been there for some time, and suddenly, for no apparent reason, a 12-foot high, spontaneously erupting fireball emitted from the pit in Midway, Arkansas. And they went so far as to rule out Satan.
Well, that's nice that Satan's still on their hit list.
As far as the spiritual Satan goes, we've ruled that out, County Judge Mickey Pendergrass told Arkansas Democrat Gazette. He didn't come up and stick his pitchfork in the ground and blow the hole out. The fire burned for 40 minutes in a hole believed to have been made by animals. And apparently they've researched it. They cannot figure out why a cylinder of flame came out of that thing. But they know it's not Satan.
Well, Satan wins that battle. The church lady would not be liking that, but at least he wins that one. He may not have won the or he won the battle. Well, who knows if he'll win the war. Let's go to the thought of the Dave. Thought of the Dave happens every day at this time, where we post a question on our Facebook and Twitter pages, and then we read your responses on the air. Why? Well, because we absolutely love having audience participation around here, and what more fun than to read your responses to the Thought of the Dave. So today's Thought of the Dave is as follows. Tell me your weirdest encounter with a cryptid, not Bigfoot, Dogman, your mother-in-law, or your ex-partner? Olive, a lot of people were a little upset that I did not allow mother-in-laws or exes in this one.
Yeah, I bet.
So today's thought of the Dave is like this. Let's start off with Jay. He goes, I was at a lake in West Texas one night. Me and my buddy, he was driving, were running down a dirt road about 25, 30 miles an hour in his old truck. We seen two red eyes out of his window, and of course he sped up to maybe 40 or 50, maybe faster. I don't know we were freaked out, and those eyes stayed right there next to us until almost back to the top. We always joked about it being the Goat Man, one of our favorite local legends we heard as kids, but it was weird as hell, and we still have never forgotten that night. Ooh, red eyes.
Damn.
Always dangerous, my friend. Always
Very.
dangerous.
Absolutely.
All right, let's get to the next one. Cat? The only encounter with a cryptid that isn't in the above mention was through the tales of the Loch Ness Monster and a small handmade clay statue that my big sister had that was given to her by someone who said they saw it. It was a long serpentine-like creature, painted green, but stories are the only cryptid I have ever witnessed. Angel says, wolf-like creatures that walk upright like a man. Creepy as hell. They sent me running for my door.
Well,
Uncle
I want to hear
Dale?
about that one.
Me too. I got to talk to Angel about that. Uncle
Yes.
Dale and his power stash. Dale has a really nice mustache. Really nice mustache. You know,
Those are hard to grow.
they are, you know.
A lot of maintenance.
Well, I think it's the hot sauce. He lives in the South, so I think it's the hot sauce that he puts on there, you know. He used a lot of hot sauce, so I'm sure that, spruces it up a little bit. Well, he says, I really think you should have had the in-laws and exes discussion in here. There ain't no vexes like exes. Oh, maybe next time. Nathan, my buddy Ned in Pittsburgh. I was watching a Facebook Live of this creature today that was trying to communicate through Dave Scott, like a woolly mammoth type creature, very hairy, very hairy. It was a scary looking thing, spoke broken English, mildly intelligent. Wow, that's a friend of mine. Good guy.
Damn.
Final word, Michael McNeil. We call him the Pen Man around here. Pen Man says, I saw about a 5 to 6 foot Chinook salmon jump out of the Willamette River about 3 times when I was fishing for trout one afternoon. I don't know how much it weighed, but it was huge. Does that count? You know what? It is fishing season, so I'm going to allow that one. I am totally going to allow that one.
A 6 foot long salmon, you've got to allow that.
Oh, dude. Where I used to fish on the Vedder River out in Chilliwack, British Columbia, and it's fishing season. Like today would have been coho day. So literally we would have been at the river about 3:45 in the morning. We'd have to sit around the fire until 1 hour before sunrise when we could finally cast the first line, and then to be Coho City. But nonetheless, the biggest salmon I ever saw in that river, my biggest that I ever caught was like 47 pounds. The biggest I ever saw out of that river, I helped a guy land a 62 pounds Chinook salmon.
That's
62 pounds, man.
Wow.
Huge.
I think the longest one I've ever seen was probably 3.5 feet.
Oh, yeah. Nice and big. Nice and big. My friend, tell everybody where they can find Paranoia Magazine.
ParanoiaMagazine.com.
Awesome. And you can find the encounter online at spacedoutradio.com. Click on the news section. Mr. Olaf Phillips will talk to you tomorrow night.
Sounds good.
And another big thank you to Mr. Rob Morphy for coming on, the crypto historian. We're going to get him back on soon. We pretty much have to. Anyways, tomorrow night on the program, Christopher Garetano comes in to talk about the Montauk Project. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. We get going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern at spacedoutradio.com. We welcome in Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses, currently of Sons of Apollo, for rocking us in and out of every single show. Bumblefoot is the official music, so get your horns up for the guitar god himself. Special thank you to everybody listening in at work, at home, in your cars, wherever you may be tonight. Special thank you to everybody on Facebook at the SOR Space Travelers Club, on Twitter at hashtag SpacedOutRadio, the Spreaker chat room, and of course on Rev Radio. Appreciate you tuning us in, doing your part to make us bigger and better every single night. Because together, my friends, we own the night. I will talk to you in 21 hours from now. Mr. Bumblefoot, we need a favor. We need you to take us home. Have a good night, everyone. Talk to you tomorrow. Good night.
There somewhere. This is the new totalitarian state. 1,000 eyes are waiting for you to break. Stay in line, don't make a mistake. We're watching. We watched you fall.